Hello and welcome. I'd like to get started by giving you some background information both on myself and on the debate between the Mac and Windows operating systems and between Apple and Microsoft, and how things have evolved over the years. I think it's very useful to understand this, although this section is not necessarily compulsory. It's useful for everyone to listen to this at least and to understand it a little. So firstly, a little about myself. I've been working in IT for many years, 25 years now, and working with computers for a long time before that. I've got experience with many different operating systems. I've used Windows an awful lot. I've repaired Windows installations for people for years, but I've always tended to use Mac OS, particularly Mac OS 10 myself. I'm an overt Mac evangelist. I will openly admit that I love the Mac operating system, and I encourage everyone I know to use it. And I'm not affiliated in any way with Apple, and they're not paying me to say this. It's from my own personal experience. The goal of this course is to explain to users who are either changing from Windows to Mac, who have already bought a Mac and are struggling using the Mac, or are considering changing to Mac, particularly people who have experience of Windows, what the differences and similarities are, and actually how easy it is to use the Mac, especially if you've used Windows before. It's not that it's a disadvantage, it's actually an advantage because you already have all the basics. You just need to understand where the differences are and the little nuances between the two. The course will be taught by taking you step by step through the different aspects of Windows that you're used to and showing you how you do that on the Mac, if it's different or if it's the same. It may look a little different, but actually when you see it, you'll realize that effectively it's the same thing. So it's going to make you comfortable with using the Mac and also take away any apprehension you have about moving operating system, because an awful lot of people are anxious and nervous about doing that, and they shouldn't be, because once you move to Mac, you won't go back. So I think pretty much everyone knows that there's always been a long-running battle between Apple and Microsoft over the years, and Apple has traditionally held a relatively small share of the market, and this is for a number of reasons. Certainly in my view, very early on, Microsoft teamed up with IBM many years ago to have its DOS operating system supplied with every new PC, and this was a major coup at the time. It basically meant that Microsoft have supplied their operating system for installation on generic PC hardware, and they've basically got it onto a huge range of PCs, standard hardware across the world. Apple, on the other hand, have always maintained very tight control over their own hardware. And what this meant was that Microsoft basically got off the ground and onto virtually every PC unit that was being built, while Apple lagged behind in those terms. However, at this stage, Windows didn't exist. There was no GUI graphic user interface available at the time. There was no such thing as a mouse to control your computer. It was all DOS-based commands, command line, typing of commands to make anything happen. Then, back in 1984, Apple introduced the first version of the Mac OS, and this was the first graphical user interface operating system to be released. And what this meant was that you could now control your computer using a mouse, and you had much more interaction with it. You no longer needed to type commands, you could point and click. So this was the Mac OS. And not long after that, Windows suddenly appeared on the market. And looking closely, you could see that it was a direct clone of the Mac OS concept, but with certain key features renamed or reshaped so that they couldn't be done for plagiarism. Things such as the recycle bin, where Apple had the trash can. And thus began this long-running battle to stay one step ahead of the other. And what most people don't realize is that Apple effectively invented the GUI operating system model that we're all so familiar with today. However, there were many factors that influenced the success or failure of both operating systems. Windows was plagued with driver-related issues since the hardware that it was running on was so vastly diverse. In other words, you could go out and buy a few different parts and build your own PC if you wanted. And to install Windows on it, you needed drivers for each part. And the problem was that some drivers or parts weren't compatible with others, and you can see how that could start to get very complicated very quickly. For Apple, their operating system was very successful, but it had one major problem. People had PCs. They had bought PCs. PCs had DOS, and now PCs could have Windows, and Mac OS didn't run on PCs. And when I say PC, PC stands for personal computer, but PCs in general were what IBM and IBM compatible computers were called generically. People were somewhat reluctant to dump their existing hardware just because they wanted to switch to Apple, and that's understandable. Worse than that, though, was the fact that practically everyone they knew also had a PC, not a Mac. And since the two were not really compatible at this stage, there was a huge gap which was difficult to bridge. So you were either a PC user or a Mac user, and there wasn't really an in-between. So Apple then took off into the publishing and design area, which was a very clever move and actually very successful. Those in publishing and design in that industry would be almost exclusively using Macs. However, that's pretty much the extent of who was using them at the time. And at this stage, Mac OS X, Mac OS 10 did not exist. We're still talking about OS 6, 7, 8, and 9. They were good, but they weren't good enough to persuade so many people to move from Windows. Of course, compatibility still remained an issue. However, at this stage, some other factors started to come into play. Microsoft were so huge at this point that they began to experience threats from many sides, particularly those keen to target them for one reason or another with viruses. And as Apple's market share was still relatively small, Microsoft took the brunt of it, and it became essential to have an antivirus program installed on your PC if you were using Windows. So this, of course, became a lot more important with the advent of the internet. In the 90s, the internet really took off and people started to use email. And that's when the real party started. Viruses on Windows-based PCs started to become a real nuisance. There's still some debate today as to whether some of the viruses may have been created by the antivirus companies themselves, thereby perpetuating their own businesses, but that's another debate. The fact is, Microsoft Windows began to show itself as being highly vulnerable to virus attacks and consistently insecure version after version, and constantly having to release patches to close security holes and often leaving users' PCs wide open to attack. And the Mac never really suffered from these problems, with a very minor number of practically harmless viruses ever having been encountered by Mac users. Personally, I've been using Macs for more than 25 years and I've never had a virus. But then in 2001, Apple introduced Mac OS X or Mac OS 10, and this was really a turning point in personal computing, in my opinion. It completely turned things around, and I'm going to explain to you why. So around the same time that Apple released the first version of Mac OS 10, Microsoft released Windows XP, and most people are familiar with Windows XP. And I have to say, in terms of Windows operating systems, Windows XP was a good one, at least once they reached Service Pack 3. However, comparing it to Mac OS 10 really just doesn't compare. So the battle continued for the following years right up to today. But there's a few things that Mac OS 10 brought to the table that are very hard to compete with. The only other operating system that comes close, in my opinion, is Linux, but I personally just don't find it as nice to use as Mac OS 10. So effectively, the place we've arrived at now is a very different place indeed. People are changing from Windows to Mac at an extraordinary rate, and this is no coincidence. And so I'm going to explain to you the 8 key strengths that I feel really make OS 10, OS X an excellent choice of operating system. So if we start with number 1, stability, Apple has always maintained very strict control over its hardware. It always has, and it continues to do so, and sometimes this drives me mad, but I can see why they do it. There's one very important and powerful result, and that is stability. Since Apple know exactly which hardware their operating system will run on, their drivers are custom built for those devices. They work, they don't clash, and there's no doubt. Strength number 2, again, stability. And I can't emphasize this enough. Mac OS X is built on a version of the Unix operating system, much like Linux. Unix is known to be incredibly stable since it was used to run large mainframe computers in the early years. It provides the possibility of each process that's running on the computer to run independently of the others, meaning that if one process fails, it does not affect the others. In simple terms, this means that if one of your applications crashes, you no longer have to restart the whole computer. You just shut down that application and relaunch it. And that's a major benefit by anyone's standards. It just doesn't create an instability in the system if something like that happens. Strength number 3 is security. Unix is also known for its incredibly high level of security built right into the operating system. Apple have been very, very clever in choosing Unix as the base for their operating system. Unlike Windows, which is built on a proprietary software base, Apple have built theirs on top of something that was already rock solid. And this means that security is inbuilt and ingrained in the operating system by default. Strength number 4, again, security. Again, I can't overstate the importance of security and the security features of Mac OS X. One of the top reasons I recommend people to go out and buy a Mac is this. You're tired of all those viruses and problems like that, right? Spyware, Trojans, malware, adware, registry problems, ultimately having to reinstall Windows very regularly. What's the solution? Buy a Mac, plain and simple. I've been using Macs for almost 30 years and I have never had a single virus. I don't have an antivirus program installed. I never have, and I probably never will. Hopefully never will. I don't get spyware, adware, malware, any of that crap. Yes, I receive spam and all those lovely Windows viruses come in, but they can't affect my Mac in any way. They don't run on a Mac. And for me, that's a reason to buy. Point number 5 is usability. Of all the operating systems I've used in my life, I have to say that Mac OS X is by far, and I mean by a long, long way, the best I've ever used. It's a pleasure to use it. I find myself wanting to use it and I miss it when I don't have it. It does what I ask when I ask. It rarely, if ever, fails, and once you understand how it works, it's a marvelous tool. It looks great and it has some really amazing effects and features. Point number 6 is that it's user-friendly, and it's similar to usability, but in terms of user-friendliness, contrary to what many people believe, the Mac is actually more user-friendly than any other operating system I've ever used. Not only is it more logical in how it works, but it actually tries to help you. It's intuitive, and if something does go wrong, you're not left with a cryptic error message that means nothing to anyone. It will generally do its best to describe what's happened, and even better still, it tries to tell you what you should do to fix it. Following that, it's practically unbreakable. The operating system is so well built and so stable that you can safely mess around without worrying about breaking it. The worst you can really do is mess up a few settings that can be easily put right by someone that knows. And this gives you the freedom to learn, since you no longer need to be afraid. And finally, and this is probably one of the greatest strengths that Apple have added to OS X in the recent years, is Time Machine. Anyone that doesn't know what Time Machine is needs to find out, needs to understand, and will almost certainly buy a Mac because of it, and because of it alone. I call it by its name because it's worthy of being known by everyone on the planet that uses a computer. What is the one thing that you're always told to do, but you never do it, or you don't do it well? Back it up. Back up your data or you'll lose it. Back it up, back it up, back it up. I spend my whole life telling people to back up their data, and they don't do it. Maybe they don't know how to do it. Well, let me tell you about backups and how they should be done. Time Machine, plain and simple. It's built into Mac OS X. It's a feature of the operating system which single-handedly and automatically takes care of all your backup needs. It doesn't just back up your data either, it backs up everything, your entire disk. So in the case of an emergency, say your hard disk dies or your laptop is stolen, all you have to do is connect your Time Machine backup drive, and Mac OS X will put you back exactly where you were at the very moment you did your last backup. Programs, settings, data, desktop patterns, you name it, everything as it was, sir. Nowadays you simply cannot argue with that. Now Mac OS X does have many other amazing features, but I'm not going to get into those right now. What I'm going to discuss is the top 5 most common questions that people ask me, or that I hear people asking or saying about Macs, or changing from Windows to Mac and so on. And I think it's worth answering these questions because they're probably the things that have been running through your mind, or maybe are at the moment. So the first one is, do I switch now and buy a Mac, or do I stick with what I know? My opinion would be this: if you've never had a computer, buy a Mac. You'll be learning something new either way, so you might as well choose to start off with the best. If you have a Windows-based PC that doesn't need changing, then wait until it does. Make your next computer a Mac. If you're ready to change your computer now, don't buy another Windows-based machine. Buy a Mac now. Don't just stick with Windows because that's what you always had, because just because you've always had it and you know it well doesn't make it the best. I mean, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got, right? Next thing, Macs are so different. I'm used to Windows. Won't I have to start all over again? Absolutely not. Remember, Windows is based on the Mac operating system. They're far more similar than they are different, and that's the whole point of this course, is to explain to you what the similarities are really more than the differences. There are a few small things that you need to familiarize yourself with, things that you have to look for in a different place or that are called by different names, as well as a few features that will make using your computer that much more enjoyable, but may take a little getting used to. But it's worth understanding those the little discrepancies or differences in how the two operating systems work. Next is, why are Macs so much more expensive to buy than PCs? Well, this is mainly due to the fact that Apple control the hardware so heavily, and because they now know that they have what people want, they're able to charge a premium for that. However, one thing to take into consideration is that most Macs come with everything you could ever need. You don't usually have to buy extra or upgrade. Even the basic Mac comes with lots of memory, a big hard disk, a fast processor, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, webcam, built-in microphone. Basically everything you need is already built in. You don't have to buy extras afterwards. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. It's probably you get Mac OS X included, and it's probably the most valuable part of the entire package. So you get what you pay for. The next thing that people ask a lot is, aren't there huge compatibility issues with other computers, like those running Windows, that are going to make my life hell? This is probably one of the most common things I hear or I get asked, and the truth and the simple answer is no. That's no longer the case. To give a simple example, I use my computer far more than most people every day to achieve a far greater number of more diverse tasks, and I never use Windows. Enough said. Compatibility is no longer an issue. That said, you can't run programs that are made for Windows natively on a Mac. But since Apple started using Intel processors, you now have two excellent options if you really need to run a Windows program. And by that I mean a program that is only made for Windows and has no Mac version, which most of them do nowadays. You can either install Windows on your Mac so that you can start up the Mac in either Mac OS X or in Windows, whichever you need at the time. Or you can install some software like VMware Fusion or Parallels Desktop, which will allow you to run Windows as a program on your Mac. So you can open Windows whenever you want, run a special program that you need to run only in Windows, and then close it down again and just use your Mac for everything else. And I know a lot of people that do that. So, even if you buy a Mac and for some crazy sick reason you decide that you don't like Mac OS X, you can just install Windows. Just install it and use it. It's simple, but I wouldn't advise it. And finally, a lot of people are concerned that you can't get all the programs from Mac that you can for Windows. That is true. Equally, you can't get all the programs for Windows that are made for Mac. But I know what you're getting at here. as I mentioned previously, there are two options for running Windows-based programs on your Mac, so that's no longer an issue. However, most programs will have a Mac version or a Mac alternative. Also, some programs will not run well in an emulator like VMware, such as games that require huge resources. And my advice would be to look at the programs that you use most and check for Mac versions. If you can't find one, and it's either a very intensive gaming program or something that's absolutely mission critical to your business, you should probably seek some advice before jumping in and changing to a Mac. But for most people, there is no issue. Just go for it. So to conclude this section, I'd just like to say, if you've already bought a Mac and you were wondering if you did the right thing, you did. If you are thinking of buying one and you're not sure, do it. And if you're worried you won't be able to manage or get on with it, or you won't be able to use it, or it's too different to Windows, it's not. Finish this course and you'll see that you will be fine. So with that, let's move on to the next section, where I'll help you set up your brand new Mac, if that's what you've got, with the very basic, some very basic setup tasks that pretty much everybody needs to do. And then we'll start looking at the similarities between Windows and the Mac and how they differ and some of the different features. Okay, so now that we've looked at a bit of background to Windows and to the Mac, we're going to have a look at what a brand new Mac looks like when you start it up. So basically there are a few things that, aside from it being similar or different to Windows, there are a few things that you need to set up at the start. One thing that most people, particularly if you've used Windows before, will be used to is a right click on your mouse. Now most Macs nowadays have the functionality of right click on the mouse, but it's actually not switched on by default. Also, the scrolling direction, for some very bizarre reason, Apple have decided that the natural scrolling direction will actually be the opposite to what everybody's been used to for the last 25-30 years. So they default the scrolling to be what they call natural, which means that when you roll up, it goes the opposite way to the way you think it should go. So to change these two settings, we're going to go to the Apple menu here. We're going to choose System Preferences. We'll get to this in a while, but these are just useful things to change when you first get your Mac, particularly if you're used to the other way around. The first thing is the mouse. In fact, both settings are here. We want scroll direction natural. No, we want what we consider to be natural. And also secondary click, we need to tick that on and make sure it's click on right side. That allows us to use a right click, and it has the scrolling the way we're used to. Okay, so we're just going to close that down. And now we're going to move on to a quick desktop configuration. Now, the next thing is we're looking here at what we call the desktop with a standard desktop pattern. You'll notice there's nothing on the desktop, and this actually is quite similar to Windows, and it hasn't always been like this. Apple have changed this recently. Why, I have no idea, but it's actually quite frustrating because Mac users in particular would be used to having their hard disk icon here always. So on Windows you would generally see My Computer, and in My Computer you'd open that and see various different things. On the Mac you would normally just see your hard disk here, and where on Windows you'd see a recycle bin, on the Mac the recycle bin is down here in the dock, called the trash. So I'm going to change one or two more little preferences to make this look a bit more like what both Mac and Windows users would be used to. To do that, I'm going to go to the Finder menu. We will also be discussing this in a while. I'm going to go to Preferences, and I'm going to tell it that I want to see on the desktop hard disks, external disks, and CDs, DVDs, and iPods. Okay, and you can see that these things have started to appear already. So we'll close that window. These are a couple of external hard disks that I have connected, and this is my main internal hard disk in the Mac. So if I open that, you'll see various things here like you would see on Windows. We can view them in different ways, but effectively what you're looking at there is your Applications folder, which on Windows would be called your Programs folder, and various other things like users folders and things like that. But having the hard disk icon here on the desktop is very useful because it gives you quick access directly to the hard disk, and it also opens a standard window with some shortcuts and favorites here already set up for you on the left hand side. Now if you hadn't set this preference to show the Macintosh HD hard disk icon here, what I find is that it's difficult to add certain favorites which we're going to add in here that you will want to have access to quickly. So to compare this to what it would look like on a standard Windows installation, we're just going to switch over to Windows. And here we have a very similar thing in actual fact. You've got the recycle bin and you've got nothing else. So on Windows you would right click, personalize, change desktop icons, and you would say, oh, please show me my computer. Recycle bin is already there. You can have users files if you want, and various different things that you can change. So now it's looking something a bit more similar to what we have on the Mac side. And this is what most people would have on their desktop. They'd have My Computer, which opens slightly differently to what it looks like on the Mac. And in there, you're seeing your hard disk. Whereas if we look back on the Mac, you're actually seeing your hard disk out here on the desktop, and there is no My Computer icon as such on the desktop. Okay, back to Windows. And in here, if you open your hard disk, you see a similar thing, program files and so on, the users folder, to what we saw back over on the Mac. So now we're getting a very similar setup on both, so that people can compare what they're used to seeing. What we're going to look at now is we're going to look at some of the main similarities between Windows and the Mac, because there are a lot, and basically the core functionality is always the same. So for example, the login process, which we can't see right here, but you'll be very familiar with it on Windows if you actually have it set up to ask you to log in, to ask for a password when you switch on Windows. On Windows, it will appear here with a little some icons of the users that are set up on your PC. You would click the icon, enter your password, and then it will load into this screen here. On the Mac, it'll be the very same. However, on the Mac, it is by default set up to automatically log in with the main user that you created when you set up your Mac. So this is called automatic login. And on the Mac, that's one of the differences, is that automatic login is always automatically configured to be on. So you don't actually have to log in with a password unless you specifically want that feature. So there are lots of common features between Windows and the Mac. We're going to take a look at most of the basic functionality and features now. So for example, your hard disk, your internal hard disk, there's always an icon to represent that, which we see here. Inside there you will find folders, files. For example, if we go to Documents, nothing in there. In here in Downloads, the Downloads folder, there's a Downloads file in there. You've got, for example, Applications, which are all the programs that you can use. You've got different documents, like we were just looking in Downloads. In your Documents folder, you'll normally have documents, but this is a brand new installation, so there's nothing in there. You would be familiar with menus, as you can see here, although they're slightly different on Windows in how they're handled, but basically the functionality is the same. You have File, Edit, View, and then you have the specific menus for the program or window that you have open. You've got on Windows a recycle bin. On the Mac you've got a trash can, which is down here. You've got, for example, on the computer itself, on the Mac or on a Windows computer, you've got physical connections such as USB ports, power ports, network connections, monitor connections. They're generally all very similar between a standard PC and a Mac, and you would connect, for example, external hard disks such as these, which are USB drives, in the same way as you would to a Windows computer. And you've also got functionalities such as, for example, drag and drop. So let's say, for example, I'm looking here at the Downloads folder, and I have a file in the Downloads folder and I want to put it out on my desktop. I simply grab it and drag it out and drop it. I can drop it back in there again, just like that. If we move over to Windows, we'll just have a look at some of the similar functionality that you have here. You've got My Computer. In My Computer, you've got your hard disk icon, which is the icon that we saw up here on the Mac. You open your hard disk icon, you've got folders, you've got program files, which is the same as applications, and you'd have all your programs listed in there. You have documents. Again, this is a new installation, so there are no documents. Any of these might have some sample pictures, so there's a folder inside this pictures library with some files in there. Again, you can choose to view these in different ways. You can arrange by folder, month, day, rating, tag, and so on. You can view them. We can find where it is. Here we are. Medium icons, small icons, list, details, tiles, and so on. Okay, so you can look at them in different ways, but they're still the same files. You also can use drag and drop. Move it to the desktop. Move it back into the folder. So a lot of the functionality is very common. So you've got menus here, as you can see. These menus are related specifically to this window that you're looking at. And this is one of the major differences between the Mac and Windows, and we're going to cover that shortly. But it's just to see that, for example, you've got the recycle bin here, which is the same as the trash can. Okay. On the Mac, we'll have a look. You can see the trash can is down here. This is your recycle bin on the Mac. And you'll notice that this window doesn't actually have menus as such. And generally speaking, on the Mac, you don't see menus really within Windows. You tend to see them more in the menu bar at the top. But that's a feature that we're going to cover shortly. So as you can see, the core functionality is the same. You can right-click. Now that we've configured right-click to work, it gives you context menus. And your mouse functionality, such as opening files and so on, is the same. One click to select, 2 clicks or a double click to open, and then you can close it down again. So before we start looking at the more in-depth features and differences between Windows and the Mac, there's one very important thing that you need to understand, and that is a key difference. And if you'll excuse the pun, it's literally differences in keys that you use. So for example, in Windows, you tend to use the Alt key for an awful lot of functions. On the Mac, the same functions are provided by the Command key. So the Command key generally looks like this. It's got either an Apple symbol. This symbol particularly represents the Command key. Sometimes it has an apple on it. It depends on your computer or your keyboard. But in this case, this is the Command key here with the red arrow pointing to it, and it's always to the left of the spacebar. The key in Windows that does the same thing or serves the same functions is generally the Alt key. Now where it gets confusing is there is also an Alt key on the Mac, but it's generally referred to as the Option key. So it has a different function on the Mac. Now these keys are called modifier keys. So basically when you type a letter on the keyboard, normally it displays a letter in wherever you're typing. If you hold down the Apple key, which is the Command key, and press one of these letters, it normally represents a shortcut to a menu command. So for example, quit, Command Q, is a very commonly used command on the Mac, and you would hold the Command key and press Q. On Windows, you would hold the Alt key and press X for exit. So it's very important to understand that the Command key is the main modifier key on the Mac, the Alt key is the main modifier key on Windows. On the Mac, you'd also use the Option key as a second modifier, the Control key also. But as a good example of where the difference lies, on Windows, a common task that you would do, that you would carry out, would be to copy or paste, where you would use Control and C and Control and V. They're the shortcuts. On the Mac, it's going to be Command C, Command V. So it's a very major difference, and it's important to understand and just get used to that. And remember, the Command key is always to the left of the keyboard. So whenever you hear me say Command F or Command Q, it's always this key here, and it's the key that you would normally be using the Alt key on Windows. So the next thing we're going to look at is what's called the Finder on the Mac. Now the Finder is basically the equivalent of the Windows Explorer in Windows. It is what allows you access to your file system to find your files, hence the name Finder, to find the programs you need. It's basically your data management tool. So it's how you access your filing cabinet, which is basically your hard disk. It's how you get to, it provides access to all of the files on your disks, your various different disks, and your Finder is used in conjunction with the desktop. And the desktop is basically all of this area out here where you can throw files and so on. And you'll often find that people have very, very cluttered desktops with files all over the place, just as they would with a normal desk or desktop. This is generally because they're not very good at filing, or they don't know how to file, and it's something that both Windows and Mac users should learn how to do, because having a huge amount of files on your desktop just creates confusion and is very difficult to find what you need when you want it. The Finder has some great features for allowing you to organize your files by creating folders. So for example, let's right click on the desktop, new folder. There's a new folder. Give it a name. Call it my folder. Now I have a new folder where I can store files. I'm going to drop that file in there. Okay, so now I'm starting to get organized already. But the thing is, I don't really want to have a whole load of folders out of my desktop either. So this is where these different shortcuts come in. So you've got your documents folder, for example. These are shortcuts to these different folders, which are all stored inside your home folder. So if I click on documents, this is where you're really supposed to store your own documents just to keep things tidy. So I can say, instead of having that on the desktop, I'll drop it in there into my documents folder. Now, if we look at Windows, we've got something very similar. We have a desktop. I can right click, I can say new folder, and we'll call it my folder. And again, it's out on my desktop, which might be convenient or might not. If I want to put that away into my documents folder, I open up my computer. I've got shortcuts here. There's my documents folder. I'm going to move this folder off the desktop and pop it in there. So this effectively is Windows Explorer. This is your desktop on Windows. So as you can see, it's very similar. It's the same concept. It just looks a little bit different. And if you look here, you've got favorites, you've got your libraries, shortcuts such as pictures, videos, music. These are all folders within your user folder on Windows, and the same thing can be seen on the Mac. Shortcuts to your favorites. Again, you've got shared devices, so these would be things on the network. Devices such as these disks that are showing up on the desktop. They're also showing up here under the devices section. And in Windows, you've got your network, computer. You'd also have other devices showing up here if they were plugged in, and shortcuts to the different areas. So what we've seen so far is that actually they're very similar, the Finder and Windows Explorer. However, there are differences. On Windows, you can of course create shortcuts. So if we want to put a shortcut to this image, we want to drop it on the desktop. Most people know what shortcuts are. Right click, create shortcut. Here's a shortcut that's been made. It's not actually the image, it's just a little pointer to the image, which we can then drop on the desktop. And therefore when we open this, it will automatically know to open this. On the Mac, to do the same thing, a shortcut is called an alias. So let's see what sort of documents we've got here. Here's a document. Click it, right click, make alias, and drop that on the desktop. So you just need to remember that on the Mac, shortcuts are called aliases. They're exactly the same thing. They work the same way. They've even got the same kind of icon. You'll notice here the same little icon. So aliases and shortcuts are the same thing. One of the main differences you'll start to see down here. You'll notice that there's a taskbar down here at the bottom in Windows, which consists of things like the date and time, network connections, messages about problems potentially problems that with Windows or with your computer, sound, and various other shortcuts to useful little utilities. This one here, for example, is to remove USB devices and so on. And then down here you have other icons that are shortcuts to different programs, like Internet Explorer. This one is Windows Media Player. Okay, and most importantly, you have the Start menu. Now we're going to switch back to the Mac, because on the Mac you don't have a Start menu. As you can see, you do have a bar down the bottom here, but it has a different function. This bar down here is called the dock, and the dock actually is used for shortcut, quick access to different programs that you use, as well as documents. So you can put documents in this section over here, and you also have the trash can, which can't be removed. You can't move that out of there. You can move other things out. And basically this is quite a distinct difference between the Mac and Windows, because we'll switch back to Windows and have a look at some of the other features of the taskbar. Aside from the Start menu, if, for example, we open Internet Explorer, we'll wait for it to open a page. Okay. And we'll open another couple of pages. Now you'll notice that if you hover over the Internet Explorer icon down here, you can see the different pages that you have open in Internet Explorer. Let's see if we've got some other programs we can open to demonstrate this. Let's have a look at, for example, Notepad and Hearts. Okay, so now we have a few different programs open. You can see that each program that's opened is showing an icon down here in the taskbar, and as you hover over it, it shows you the windows of that program. So you can see that these programs are here. As you click on them, the program comes to the front. Okay, I click them again and it actually hides the program. Click Internet Explorer, you can click one of the windows that you were using in Internet Explorer and bring that to the front. Okay, now you're familiar with that functionality if you've used Windows. Looking at how that works on the Mac, if you open Safari, for example, which is the Mac equivalent of Internet Explorer, incidentally Internet Explorer does not exist on the Mac. It used to, but they don't do it anymore. Okay, so here's Safari. Now you'll notice that I click Safari. Now these are actually applications that are not open. These are shortcuts to be able to open these programs that I use a lot, that I commonly open. And you'll notice that because I've clicked Safari, underneath Safari you get this little white dot showing that it's open. So if I open Notes, it bounces up and down to tell me that it's opening. Nice little animation. And you'll see it has a little white dot underneath it now showing me that it's open. Again, if I open more than one window in Safari, all those windows are open. You can see them one behind each other there. If I go down here and hold my finger down on the Safari icon, I can see the different windows that are open and I can switch from one to the other. But this doesn't create icons in the dock when you open applications. It simply gives you a shortcut to open the applications that you commonly use, and it indicates to you when those applications are open. And you can also right click on the application to do various different things like quit the application. So you can actually close it down and all its windows by just doing that. And the same with Notes. Right click, quit. When these applications are open, and if one is, for example, obscured by the other, like that, you can simply click Notes and it'll just bring it to the front. You can click Safari and it'll bring that to the front. So really you can see that even though the taskbar and dock look quite a lot different, they actually perform pretty much the same tasks. So next we're going to take a look at the different ways that you can view files on your computer. So let's go back to our pictures folder, and you can see on Windows we're now looking at this in tile mode. We can change that to large icons, medium icons, small icons, list, details, tiles, content, extra large icons. On the Mac you can do very similar things. So on the Mac you can do something very similar, but again you'd access it in a slightly different way. So we'll open up, for example, the applications folder here so we can get some good view of a good list of files and folders. It'll be a good example to use here. And at the moment we're looking at this in column view. And column view means that if you click on a folder, which is indicated by this arrow here, if you click on a folder, it will show you the subfolder. And as many subfolders as it has, you can drill down through them and look at all the contents, and you can scroll back through them and click to different folders. This is one of my favorite views. I find it very quick to navigate. You can also use list view, which is fantastic because it shows you all the folders, and you can actually open multiple folders using the little drop down triangle. And while it seems like it might be a little bit cluttered, where this is very useful is if you want to select files from multiple folders at the same time, and you can then drag them to wherever you want to put them. So it's a very useful view for multiple selection of files and folders across files and folders. Then you also have icon view, and in icon view, obviously, let's go back to the applications folder here. It's a little better. Icon view. So you can see the standard icon set, but you also have in here or in the view menu. This is a context menu that will show you appropriate options. Or in the view menu, you can go to show view options, and that applies to the window that you're looking at. You can change how it arranges and sorts the icons and so on, but you can also change the size of the icons. You can have them as big and small as you want. You can see the quality of those images stays incredibly sharp, even to very large size. And you can also change the size of the grid spacing. So you can put them very, very close together, further apart, whatever suits you. You can change the text size, where the labels are positioned, if you want to see more information, if you want to see a preview of the icon or not, backgrounds. You can even have image backgrounds on the window and various different things. So it's very configurable. And this show view options applies to the type of view that you've selected. So you'll see there's two different options here when we're in list view. It's different. It allows you to choose different columns and so on. It's different to the icon view because the list view obviously shows different information. And likewise, if you change to column view, this is context sensitive, so it depends on which one you've chosen. And finally, cover flow view, which allows you to skim through the elements, the contents of a folder, like so, very much like you would through the list of music albums and so on in iTunes. So you can click it directly from there, or you can scroll through it in the list at the bottom here. Personally, I like column view. I find it quick to navigate, but it depends on what you're trying to do. So there's quite a difference there in how you can view the different icons, to view the files in different folders. It's a bit different to how it works in Windows, but effectively the same thing. You just look at it from a different way. So something that very often bothers Windows users when they use Mac, when they switch over to Mac OS, is that if you look at this window, for example, we're looking here at the Microsoft.NET folder inside the Windows folder on the local C disk. inside this folder there are more folders and files, and as you can see they're ordered by folders first and then files. Now this seems to be quite a common thing on Windows, and a lot of people get very used to this. It's not a feature that's readily available built into the Mac OS, and it's not something that anyone using a Mac from the beginning has ever looked for. But if you're used to it when you've been using Windows, it's very frustrating when you can't do it. So if we were to take a look at how this works on the Mac, for arranging and sorting icons within a folder and so on, you can see the applications folder here has lots of files and folders inside it. Normally these would be arranged by name, and you can choose different ways to arrange them. But you also have a sort feature, and strangely the sort feature is not actually listed by default. So to get to it, you hold down the Option key, which is actually often labeled as Alt, and it's known as the Option key on the Mac. You hold that down, and clicking the same menu, you now get a Sort By option. But in order to use that, you need to make sure that Arrange By is set to None. And then you can sort by whatever it is you like. So, for example, in this case, I'm sorting by name and arranging by none or arranging by name, whichever. You can arrange by none and then hold the Option key, use the sort by and sort by kind, and it will actually group the folders together. But it groups them together at the bottom of the window. And what Windows users are generally used to is that it groups the folders together but also puts them first. So this is not something that's readily easy to do within Mac OS without using a third-party application. And there is one available from a website called trankinam.com. It's called Extra Finder. I would suggest, if this is a feature that you really need and want and are used to, and you want to use that on your Mac to make it feel more comfortable and familiar to you, I would suggest downloading Extra Finder and installing it. It seems to be a very good program, and it has other features as well that will certainly make the user experience a little bit more like what you're used to. On the other hand, a lot of people just get used to not using that because it's not really necessary, but each to their own, basically. So you'll see as you navigate around in Windows, so we click on Music, this changes to Libraries, Music, Documents changes to Documents. If we click on Local Disk, it shows you that your computer, local disk. This shows you where you are in the file system in Windows, and it shows the contents of the last entry here. So we're currently looking at the contents of local disk. If we go into Program Files, we're now looking at the contents of Program Files, and at any point you can click on one of these if you want to go back a level to the previous, or you can use this arrow. This is, you'll notice that there's no name on this window, there's no title. This effectively is the title, it's telling you where you are. On the Mac it's slightly different again. You'll notice that each window has a title. So here we're looking at applications, so it's telling you this is the applications folder that you're looking at. If we click on Adobe Extension Manager CS6, it's telling us that's the folder we're currently looking at. You'll see this also in List View. If we double click a folder and open it, it's telling us what is the name of the folder we're looking at. But you do have access to the location bar, a similar thing to what you see in Windows. By holding the Command key and clicking the title, you can see exactly where you are, and you can move forward and backwards to the different folders, so we can go straight back to applications like so. Generally speaking, especially if you're using column view, you don't need that very much because you can just move forwards and backwards as you want. Using the back arrow or just clicking back, you can see them all. You can see the different folders back different levels. But if you ever want to see where you are, you're not sure where you are, you just Command click and it will show you exactly where you are. You also have a little search feature built in here, which you've got here called Spotlight, and this is sort of like a quick search feature which actually is really like Spotlight. If we search for pictures, you can see that it's automatically searching this Mac, but we can tell it we just want to search in the Adobe folder or in the shared folder, depending on where you are. This is kind of context sensitive. Spotlight is a more global thing, so we can search for pictures here and it will actually show everything that it finds about pictures on your Mac. That is categorized by the type of files, where they are, the most common or likely result that you're looking for, and you can show all of these and look at them all and see which one it is that you're looking for. You can view them in all the different ways. So Spotlight is a very powerful search feature. It actually searches inside emails. It searches everywhere. You can see it searches inside PDFs, inside presentations, does web searches. It's a very comprehensive search feature, which you should look more into. You should have a look online about how it works, because it's actually very, very powerful. One lovely little trick that a lot of people are starting to use now on the Mac is, rather than going looking for the application, let's say you don't have an application that you commonly use or that you're looking for in your dock, you would normally have to go in here and click applications and find the app you're looking for. Let's say it's, for the sake of argument, say it's Skype, and you would go in there and open it up. What you can do is go Spotlight, start typing Skype and hit enter. And you'll see that it's loading Skype here. So it's actually a very quick way of even finding apps to open and having the Mac open them for you. So that covers a lot of the differences between the Finder and Windows Explorer. There are other more in-depth differences that we're going to look at individually in different sections. Another very useful difference to know about is Windows users will be very familiar with the Properties feature. So we can go to My Computer, right-click, choose Properties, and it will tell me all about my computer. Type of processor, how much RAM it has, what kind of Windows it's got, and so on. And it also, in this case, gives you quick access to different things like Device Manager and so on. On the Mac, to do the same thing, you use the Apple menu. And we'll be talking a bit more about the Apple menu shortly, but for the sake of this section, clicking the Apple menu, choosing About This Mac, will actually give you the same information. It will also take you straight to the software update panel if you want to check and see if there are any software updates available. This is like Windows Update. And you've also got a More Info button, which will take you to the System Profiler, System Information app, and you've got much more information here about the computer in general, memory, and so on. Quick access to support and service links and other such things. You can also go to System Report, which will give you even more detail about all of the different things that are connected, the different hardware and software, and so on. And we can use the little red X here to close that window, close this window. And so, of course, the Properties feature in Windows can be used in a different way or a similar way. So we can look for the properties of a file, like one of these images, for example. Right-click it, Properties, and it will tell us all about the file, when it was created, what its size is, where it is, what type of file it is, what its name is, and so on. And also under the Security tab, you can see who's allowed to do what with this file. To get to the same thing on the Mac, which a lot of people need to do quite often, you right-click on the file and you choose Get Info. And this tells you basically the same thing. It tells you when it was created, modified, its size, the type of file it is, There's lots more information available here. Its name and extension, what program it should open when you try and open this type of file, a preview of what's inside it, and then sharing and permissions is basically the same as the security tab. Note that in order to change the sharing and permissions, you need to click the padlock, and this is another feature of the Mac which is very important, and we'll cover in a separate section a bit later on. But this is basically the authentication system. Okay, so GetInfo is a very useful tool, and it's something that I'm sure a lot of Windows users use and will, or at least they would know it as properties on Windows, but it's called GetInfo on the Mac. So let's start by looking at a common feature in Windows that often causes problems when a user changes to using Mac. That's the maximize button. That's this button up here in the top right of your window. Now, on Windows, when you click the maximize button, it maximizes the window to be the full size of your screen. When you click it again, it brings it back to the size that it was before. On the Mac, this functionality is slightly different. Let's switch over and have a look. So let's open a Finder window. Now you'll notice that the minimize, maximize and close buttons are actually on the other side of the window, which is another difference. The red X here is to close the window. The yellow minus is a minimize button, which basically minimizes it to the dock. You click it again, it brings it back. And the green button is the maximize button, but it's actually not a maximize button in the same sense as in Windows. Clicking the maximize button actually brings it to the larger size that you last used it at. So for example, if you bring it to this size, clicking maximize will bring it back and bring it back to the larger size that you had set. Now in some windows you will get another icon over here which will actually look like two arrows, which will actually bring the window to the full size of the screen, covering the menu bar, hiding the menu bar in fact. But this maximize feature works differently on the Mac, and a lot of people get frustrated by that. So effectively it doesn't make it the full size of the screen, it just brings it back to the larger size that you had preset it at, or to a sort of default size. The next thing is the quick access icons, which for example you find here in Windows in the taskbar. For example, you've got the date and time here, you've got the network connections, each of which has usually got its own sort of features or menu when you click on it. Solving problems, the sound, quick access sound utility, and this little icon which shows other hidden icons. These are all sort of utilities that are useful for you to be able to access. On the Mac you find these things here in the menu bar, at the top right of the menu bar. And there'll be similar things. For example, this here is the airport icon. You've got Bluetooth, you've got Time Machine for backing up, which is something we'll talk about later. Date and time, this is to do with your user accounts. You've got Spotlight, which is for searching. Notification Center, another very useful little tool. So effectively they're in a different place. And these things, some of them can be turned on and off in the system preferences as to whether you want them to appear here. Many of these options, or probably all of these options, can be accessed from a different location. These are just shortcuts. So to be aware that they appear in a different place on the Mac, but they're a similar idea. They carry out similar functions. So in this section we're going to look at the difference in how menus work between Windows and the Mac. There's a very important difference here, and it comes in relation to the menu bar. So we're going to move back to Windows and have a look at how this works in Windows. So for each application, the application tends to have its own menu bar within the window that application uses. So as you move the window around, the menu goes with it. In Internet Explorer, they've redesigned it a little bit in some of the later versions, so you can see it doesn't really have much of a menu, but actually the menus are here. Okay, and they're within the window. There's no common menu bar at the top of the screen or really at the bottom of the screen. When I say menu bar, I mean this kind of thing that has menus in it. So each application or each window almost has its own menu bar integrated. On the Mac, it's generally not like that, and we're going to have a look at that now. So you'll see Safari has no menu bar. These are shortcuts, these are favorites. This is the same in most browsers. If we look at Notes, it doesn't have a menu bar built in. If we look at Contacts, it doesn't have a menu bar built in. Practically no Mac application has a menu bar built into the windows of the application. The menus are up here, and that menu bar is always there. It's very rare that that menu bar would be hidden for any reason. It's intended to always be there unless you specifically hide it for some reason. And the very, very important thing to note here is that this menu bar changes according to the application that you're using. So at the moment we're looking at Contacts. It's the forefront application, and these are the menus that apply to the Contacts application. Now I'm going to click on Safari, or any Safari window, but we'll click on Safari. And you'll notice that the menus have changed completely. Now we're looking at the Safari menus. I'm going to click on Notes again, and now we're looking at the Notes menus. So the menu bar is completely context sensitive to the application that is in the foreground. And this also applies to the Finder. So if we click on the desktop or on the Finder icon here, now the menus change to the Finder menus. And this is something that gets people really confused because they don't understand that the menu bar changes according to the application you're looking at. So now I'm going to click on the Safari window. That effectively brings Safari to the foreground, and now all the Safari menus are available. So this is a very key difference that you must understand in order to really grasp how to use the Mac properly. So let's just flick back to Windows for a minute. And in any of these programs or windows that have menus, we can generally find a way of closing the program. And in Windows, if you close all of the windows of a program, it's asking me, do I want to close all the tabs? Yes, I do. It actually closes the program. On the Mac, it doesn't. Very rarely does it do that. So you can see that I've closed down all the windows. Notepad is actually still open, but I had it minimized. So I click it again. There it is. If I close that window, which is the only window of Notepad that's still open, Notepad, the application, closes as well. However, on the Mac, we have Safari open. We have Notepad open, or Notes. We have Contacts open. If I close the Contacts window, the Contacts app does close. However, Safari, if I close all the open windows of Safari, Safari is still open. You can see from the menus, Safari is still open. You can see from this little white dot under here, Safari is still open. Just all its windows are closed. And this applies to almost all Mac applications. There are some that Notes is probably another example. If you close the window of Notes, it closes Notes, because there are some that are basic application or utility programs that really only have one window as a function, and generally when you close that window it means you're done with the app, so it closes. But the vast majority, for example Microsoft Word, let's have a look here. Nope, not Microsoft Office. Okay, we're going to open a new document and a couple of more documents, and you'll see there's 3 documents open there. We've got the Microsoft Word menus. If I click on the Finder, it switches back to the Finder menus even though Word is open in the background, and we can hide it if we want to, but it's still there. If we click on any of the Word documents, Word comes to the forefront. We close all the Word documents, but Word still remains open. We can click on the Finder. We now have the Finder menus, but Word is still open, and you can see that from the little dot underneath. So if I click it, it just switches back to Word because it's already open. And this is a very different behavior from Windows, but the menu switching is something that confuses the vast majority of people. So what you've got to remember is that you're always looking at the menus of the most forefront application, which can also be the Finder if you happen to click on Finder or click on the desktop. It will always show you the menus that apply to the most forefront application, and the Finder is effectively an application. It just happens to be there in the background all the time. So even if we cancel this, that doesn't close Word. If we close this document, it doesn't close Word. Word is still open until we tell it to close or quit. And if we go back to Windows, I'm not sure if we have Word installed here, we probably don't. But we'll have something else that we can use. Accessories, WordPad for example. Okay, it's like a mini version of Word, and it probably won't allow us to open multiple documents there in that window without saving, but you can see that the menus are encapsulated within the actual window of the program, and as soon as I close the window, the program goes away. And that's not necessarily what I always want, but whether I want it or not, it's important to know that that is a difference between Windows and the Mac, and there is no menu bar that's always available on Windows. Now I'm just going to switch back to the Mac for a moment, because one nice feature of this is that, for example, if you've got the Contacts application open, and maybe Notes as well, and you've got a few windows and so on. This is a Finder window here, this is Notes, this is Contacts. If you're wondering which program am I actually in at the moment, what am I using, which one is active, all you've got to do is look at the menu bar, and you'll notice that Finder is active. So we're actually working in the Finder at the moment. Even though we can see these, we're still working in the Finder. When we click on Notes, we're now working in Notes. When we click on Contacts, Contacts has come to the front. So you can always see by looking at the menu bar which application you're actually working in. And whenever you want to close one, you simply go quit. And this symbol here is, remember, the symbol for the Command key. So where you would normally do Alt-X on Windows to quit a program, the shortcut, on the Mac it's always Command Q. So instead of clicking that, I can just simply Command Q. And the application quits. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is the Apple menu. So you can see in the top left hand corner of the screen here on the Mac, you've got this little black apple. Okay, this little black apple is quite similar in a way to the Start menu on Windows. We'll just take a quick look at that. So down here you have the ball in the bottom left hand corner. I'll just close this window. On Windows XP, for example, this used to say Start. It used to actually be the Start menu. It's still called the Start menu, but it's symbolized by this little ball with the Windows logo. Clicking that gives you various options, access to different things. And the Apple menu on the Mac is similar. So if we look in the Apple menu, the sort of things you find in there are about this Mac, which we've already seen in a different section, which shows you some information about the Mac itself, which was similar to doing a right-click get properties on Windows, properties of my computer. Also in the Apple menu you have direct access to software update, which would be on Windows, the Windows update. App Store, which is something that we're going to look at a bit later, but is something that you don't really have on Windows. And this is a direct access to Apple's online application store, where you can buy apps directly and download them straight to your Mac. And if you've ever used an iPhone or an iPad, or in fact most mobile devices, will have access to a type of app store like this, where you can download apps directly without having to go out and purchase them or buy a physical DVD or anything like that. Then you have access to system preferences. We'll just take a very quick look at this because we're going to look at some of these later. But basically, system preferences is the equivalent of your control panel on Windows. So if we just switch back to Windows for a moment, you'll see in the Start menu, where you will be used to going to Control Panel, this is where you go to the Apple menu and choose System Preferences on the Mac. You also have in the Start menu here access to all programs and that kind of thing. That really is replaced by, more so by the dock and direct access to the applications folder through the Finder. You don't have this kind of application access menu on the Mac. Then you have other shortcuts and things in here. These are not in the Apple menu. The main things that you'll find are Control Panel, which are System Preferences. And then you also have quick access to settings about the dock. So whether you want hiding turned on, which basically hides the dock until you go down there, where it brings it up. When you move away, it disappears. Very nice little feature. You can turn that on and off in here. You can also turn on and off magnification. So we turn magnification on in the dock, and when we roll over it, it makes the icons bigger, which is fantastic if you have issues with your site and you prefer the icons to be bigger, but you don't want them always to be that big. So we just switch that back off. You can decide where you want to have your dock. You can have it on the left, on the right, which is now gone off onto another screen I have, or on the bottom, which is the default location. Location has to do with network system preferences, so we'll take a look at that in a little while. Then you've got recent items, which will show you recent applications, documents, and servers that you have used. So you can go in there and choose apps that you've used recently if that's what's useful to you. We're going to skip Force Quit for a minute, and I'll explain to you what that is shortly. We're going to look at that independently in another session. And then you've also got the equivalent sleep, restart, shutdown, and logout options that you have here in the Start menu on Windows. So you've got switch user, log off, log out, lock, restart, and sleep. And shutdown is here as the sort of default option. So on Windows, switch user is the equivalent of using fast user switching on the Mac, which we haven't got to yet. Log off is the same as log out. Lock basically just brings up the login screen. Restart will restart the computer, and sleep will put it to sleep, and shutdown will shut it down completely. On the Mac, in this menu, in the Apple menu, you've got sleep, restart, shutdown, and log out. You don't have a lock option as such. You would just log out if that's what you want to do, or you set up a screensaver to come on with a password or something like that. Or you can set other preferences that are similar to lock, and it will do it automatically. And up here in the menu bar, you'll see we mentioned earlier that this was a little account access menu. So this is showing you which account you have logged in at the moment. So I'm logged in under an account called Demo. It shows you other accounts that you can log in with, and you can literally just choose which account you want, and it will switch to that account. It will ask you to enter the password for that account, and then it will switch to that account. And that is the same as using the switch user option here in Windows. Okay. And finally, we have Force Quit. And Force Quit is the equivalent of Control-Alt-Delete on Windows. It basically brings up this screen, which shows you all the applications that are running. It's like a mini version of the Task Manager. There is a Task Manager in the Mac, but this is a very simplified version for providing the features that most people would use, which is, oh, one of my applications is not responding for some reason. I need to force it to quit so I can reopen it. You literally click it, force quit, confirm that you want to do that, and it will close that application. This won't cause any instability in the system at all, and you can reopen that application straight away. It may be that something went wrong with the application itself and it wasn't able to continue what it was doing. And this is how you would actually force quit the application. There is a shortcut for that. So on Windows it's Control Alt Delete. On the Mac it's Command Option and the escape key. So this symbol here is for the escape key. So it's Command Option Escape will bring up this window, whichever, so you can see the shortcut here, Command Option Escape. It will bring this window up whichever application you're using. Okay, so that's the Apple menu, and the Apple menu you'll use a lot because you'll want access to things like System Preferences, App Store, Software Update in particular. You can access these from other places like System Preferences. All of these are really accessible via System Preferences, but it's a very quick access to restart, shutdown, log out, which you'll use a lot. So that's the Apple menu, and now you know what it is, why it's there, and roughly what it's equivalent to on Windows. So now we're going to talk about some features that you'll be very familiar with on Windows. If you use the Start menu to get to Control Panel, we're going to look at both Control Panel and Windows Update and their equivalents on the Mac. So the Control Panel is something that many people would use a lot, very often, because there's so many different preference settings and customization settings and things like that that you need regularly. User accounts, security, personalization, the clock, setting the clock language and region, adding hardware, uninstalling programs, all these kind of things. So these are the sort of things that you do on Windows using the Control Panel. On the Mac, we're just going to take a look at where you get to that. So again, you're going to your Apple menu. It's also down here in the dock. You can put a shortcut to it in the dock if you wish. It's effectively an application called System Preferences, but the Apple menu is always available no matter what application you're using. You can click the Apple and go directly to System Preferences. So it's the same as clicking the Start menu and going to Control Panel. You always have access to it no matter where you are in the system. So you can see that on the Mac, System Preferences basically shows the different panels that you have access to in the System Preferences, and they're somewhat divided up by relevant groups just to make it a bit quicker to access them. So let's have a quick look on Windows at what we would have in there. So for example, clock language and region takes you in here to a section where you can set the time and date, change the time zone, change the region and language that your computer is based on. Now, interestingly, changing the display language is something that you can change the keyboard setup on Windows very easily, but to change the overall language that the operating system is displaying to you, that's not so easy generally in Windows. In Windows 7 Ultimate you can change the language, but in the other versions you generally have to buy the other language version and reinstall it completely and so on. It's quite a complicated thing. On the Mac it's very simple. If you go back to Control Panel Home here, again you've got access to network and internet settings. So for sharing, home group, network access, your different network devices and so on. Appearance and personalization to change the desktop pattern, and various things of how Windows looks and how you prefer to use it. User accounts for setting up new accounts. If you want to set up accounts for family members or whatever, so they can log in and have their own specific accounts. So we're going to flick over to the Mac and just have a look how some of those compare. So here in the personal section you've got general, some appearance settings and other preferences like how many items you want to appear in this recent items list. you might want to only have 5 of each or 10 of each, and where scroll bars appear, different color settings. You've got your desktop and screensaver settings, so we can change the desktop pattern to whatever we want. We can put our own photo in there, we can have the picture change, we can have solid colors, we can have photos pulled in from our photo library, whatever we like. The screensaver, we can choose how we want that to work, when we want it to come on, what we want it to display, use hot corners, various different settings like that. We're not going to go through all these because there's a lot of different panels here, and they all equate to the type of thing that you'll see in the control panel on Windows, and it's quite easy to find where most of these things are. Some of the things that are a little different is that, for example, here you have language and text. And if you want to change the language that the Mac operating system is running in, you literally drag the language you want, for example Spanish, drag it to the top. And it tells you here that changes will take effect the next time you log in. So you should go to the Apple menu, log out, log back in, and when you log back in, everything will be in Spanish. If you want it back in English, you just drag English back up to the top. Same thing, log back out, log back in, and it's changed. Simple as that to change the language. So this is something substantially different from Windows. Also in there in language and text, you can change the other type of things like input sources, what type of keyboard you're using, the region that you're in, the type of currency settings, and so on. These are all equivalent to what you have here in Windows: control panel and clock language and region. Okay, so you've got change display language, location, date, time, number, format, keyboards, and other input methods. So you can see they're equivalent. The main thing to understand is that on the Mac it's called System Preferences, on Windows it's called Control Panel. But you also do have a lot of other settings in here which you may not have on Windows. In fact, you almost certainly won't have. So things like dictation and speech, accessibility you may have a certain amount of on Windows, but these are for changing settings to do with how you interact with the computer. So for example, if you have problems with your eyes or problems with your hearing or so on, you want to be able to magnify things or have different colors or those sort of things, you can change them all in there. You can even have voiceover where it will actually talk to you, telling you what's on the screen and those type of things. There are lots of cool new and extra features in here, like mission control, and there's parental controls. There are lots of things like that, notification center, spotlight. Features that we're going to cover very quickly in a later section, just to introduce you to these features, because this is not a tutorial on how to use the Mac from start to finish. This is to show you the similarities and differences between Windows so that you can adjust to using the Mac. So the other thing that's very important is Windows Update, software update on the Mac. So while we're here looking at this panel, looking at System Preferences, you can see that there's a panel here called Software Update. This panel is where you're taken when you choose Apple menu Software Update. It takes you directly to that panel. Well, actually there's some settings in here, but when you click Check Now, it takes you to this this window that's opening in the background here. So the software update preference panel basically has just the basic preferences for the software update. When you press Check Now, that's the equivalent of pressing the button on Windows Update saying, see if there are any updates. You can see that it's telling me here it's just checked and there aren't any updates available. Software update on the Mac has now been integrated with the App Store, so you can see the program that's active at the moment is the App Store. And the updates are actually delivered via the App Store app. So even the operating system is considered to be an app in that sense. So if a new version of the operating system, the Mac operating system, comes out, for example, we're currently on 10.8, which they call Mountain Lion. When someone is using 10.7, which was called Lion, when Mountain Lion becomes available, it's available in the App Store, so you can actually go to the App Store, look for it, purchase it, download it, and install it all in one go without ever having to buy a physical disk or anything. And therefore it handles all of the software updates for the operating system through the App Store as well. So you're just looking at the updates section in the App Store, and this is where you'll see any updates that are available for the operating system or any of the built-in software, or in fact any of the apps that you have bought from the App Store. On Windows, we'll just have a quick look at how this works. Generally speaking, you would go to the Start menu, All Programs, Windows Update, or you can go to Control Panel, and you'll also find Windows Update in here. Under System Security, Windows Update. So you can go directly to the Windows Update panel, or in fact, the same as on the Mac, you can click Check for Updates directly, and it will go off looking for updates, and it's telling us here there's 2 important updates available, and we can select those and tell it to install them. It's very similar on the Mac. Within this panel here, once you say check now, it will say, oh, these updates are available, and you can choose to install them individually or all together, whichever way you prefer. So that's how the software update works, and it is important to keep your software up to date, both on Windows and on the Mac. Okay, so we'll close these down. And the settings that are available there in software update panel are basically whether you want it to automatically check for updates or if you want to just do it periodically yourself. It's better to leave it to check for them automatically at least, so that it tells you when they're available. You can have it download updates automatically in the background if you wish. This is something that I prefer to do so that they're ready to install when I decide to install them. I don't have to wait for them to download. And whether you want to install system data files and security updates. Generally speaking, all updates is good. And you can also have apps that were purchased on other Macs and so on downloaded automatically, but that's not as an important option. So that's basically it for software update and system preferences. There are, like I say, a lot of preferences available in here, and we'll be covering some of those in another section, such as printing and scanning, but we won't get into all of them in this tutorial. The final thing I want to talk about in this section is the concept of Wi-Fi on the Mac. Pretty much every Mac comes with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth as standard built in, and as we've mentioned before, Apple like to control their hardware quite heavily, so they have their own Wi-Fi card, and it's called an airport card. So anywhere you see airport in relation to the Mac, it's generally to do with the Wi-Fi. So if we look at Windows temporarily, this particular machine doesn't have Wi-Fi. This installation of Windows doesn't have a Wi-Fi driver installed, so you can't see any Wi-Fi connection here. The only internet access connection it has is via a cable connection. However, if Wi-Fi was installed, you'd see generally an icon down here, and that icon will be different in this quick access section of the taskbar here. The icon will be different depending on the Wi-Fi card that was installed, the drivers that go with that card, how it configures it, and so on. So you'd be used to seeing something down here about Wi-Fi, or you may often see it in this section if Windows has been told to control the driver for that card. So you would see wireless networks appearing in here, and you choose the network and put in the password and so on. On the Mac, your airport symbol is this radar symbol here in the menu bar at the top. And if you click that symbol, you'll see at the moment Wi-Fi is turned off. So if I turn Wi-Fi on, you'll see the radar symbol appears and it's starting to look for networks. When it has either some or all of the bars solid and not flashing, it means it's connected to a network, and you can see that it's connected to a network here. The lock shows that it has a password on that network, so the password has already been entered and saved, and the Mac is now connected to that network. If there were more networks, which we'll see now if it finds any more, when you click this icon, you'll see Wi-Fi on, and it says looking for networks, and it will periodically check to see if there are any other networks, and sometimes you might see others appearing here. So you choose the network you want by just clicking on it, and it will, if you haven't used it before, it will pop up asking you for the password for that network. So this airport symbol here is where you go when you want to manage your Wi-Fi. To actually change the settings for your wireless networks and IP settings and more advanced configurations, you can click on the airport symbol, go to Open Network Preferences, and what this will do is the same thing as going to the Apple menu to System Preferences and choosing Network. So it will take you straight to that section. And you can see here it's showing you the different network connections that you have. This is not just specifically for Wi-Fi. Ethernet is a cable connection. Wi-Fi is your airport connection, which is selected at the moment, and you can see the radar symbol which represents the Wi-Fi. It's telling you that you're connected, the IP address that you have, whether you can actually turn on and off the Wi-Fi card here, the same as you can from the little menu up here. This button will do the same thing. This icon here will actually allow you to remove that icon from the menu bar if you want to, but generally it's a good idea to have it there because it's quick access. And clicking the advanced button will take you into all the different settings that you can change. And I'm not going to get into what all these settings are. Most people would never even really come in here. Suffice it to say that in the Wi-Fi tab, you can see all the networks that you have connected to, the type of security that those networks use, and these are basically stored networks that you've connected to in the past with the passwords stored along with them. But you can't change the password here. If the password for the network that you use has changed, you need to click the network, remove it from the list, say OK, apply the settings, and then go back and choose the network again and re-enter the new password. So Wi-Fi on the Mac is airport. On Windows, it could be the built-in Windows controller here, or it could be any number of different Wi-Fi icons, depending on the brand of the card that you're using and so on. So it's important to understand that that's what this symbol is, and you know where to go to connect to a wireless network and how to configure it. And that's here again in the System Preferences under Network. So we're now going to look at how the Mac handles printing and scanning, which of course is a very important feature for most people. The Mac is generally extremely plug and play, where, you know, for a long time Windows has maintained that it has been a plug and play operating system. In reality, with the driver issues and so on, it's not always like that, and if something goes wrong, it can be quite tricky to configure it and tell it how to work. The Mac is generally very straightforward, very plug and play. When you buy a new printer, you generally plug it in. It either installs the drivers for you automatically, or tells you, I don't have any drivers for this, do you want me to go and get them? And it goes and gets them for you. Or in the worst case, it will say, sorry, I can't find the drivers, you'll need to go and download them from the manufacturer's site. In which case you'll usually have a disk that you can put in that will have the drivers to install. But in most cases that's not even necessary. So on Windows, where you find the printers and scanners, Start menu, Devices and Printers, and generally speaking you'll see your printers here set up and ready to go if you have any installed. Okay. On the Mac, instead of going, on Windows, you can see here at the top, you can see that this is in Devices and Printers, which is found in Hardware and Sound, which is found inside the Control Panel. So if we go to Control Panel, we will go hardware and sound, devices and printers, and we get to the same place. On the Mac, you find this in System Preferences, Print and Scan. Okay. You can add a new printer very simply. Press the Add button. The default list mechanism here will show you anything that the Mac can find nearby. So you can see it's just found the fax device for this printer. And if there are other USB printers, other network printers, and so on available on the network or directly connected to your Mac, they'll appear here. You simply choose it. It will automatically try to choose the right driver if it's available. If it's not, it will generally tell you you don't have the drivers installed for this. They haven't come with your Mac, but we can get them for you. Do you want to get them? You say yes. When you're ready, you hit Add. And it will literally appear here. And off you go. You can start printing straight away. When you actually print, so let's just send something to print here. We'll just send this page to print. You get the option of choosing which printer you want to use. So it defaults to this one because it's the only one I've got. You can add a new printer from here or go directly to Print and Scan Preferences if you wish, if you have a new printer that you forgot to install or something. You choose the printer you want, you choose the settings as normal, and you tell it to print. And you'll notice that down in the dock, this printer icon has appeared. This is what's called the print queue. So we'll open that, and you'll see it's telling us here, this printer is printing this document, and once it's done, this will disappear. So this is the print queue, and this opens automatically when you're printing. But if it's not open, you're not printing, and you happen to want to open that window because you might have saved something in the queue that you've paused or something like that, coming to the Print and Scan window here via System Preferences, you can click the printer you want and open Print Queue, and it will take you straight to that window where you can see any documents that are waiting to print. You can make this window bigger and smaller if you wish. You can pause the printer. In this case, it's asking me to put in an administrator password to confirm that you want to do that, and again you want to resume it. It's now resume the queue, and it will start printing with the first document that's ready to go. You can equally have documents in there that are actually paused individually, so you can restart those documents when you want. And you can also access the settings for the printer in here. So it will show you supply levels, and these settings completely depend on the actual printer you have and the driver software and so on. So you can see by opening printer utility, it's opened up the HP utility because this is a HP printer. It's part of the drivers that come with this printer. And this gives me all sorts of different options and settings. This will be quite similar on Windows as well. Okay, so you've got the two different sections here for printing. You've got the System Preferences where you manage your printers, add new printers, delete printers, and so on. And then for each printer, you have the print queue, which is specific to that printer, shows you the documents to be printed, and allows you to pause the queue and change specific settings for that printer. On Windows, you can also access the print queue. Let's try and print something here so you can see this. Just tell it to print. Okay, let's just say we print one page from Internet Explorer. And you'll notice a similar thing happens. You get down here a little icon in the tray. Double click it, you get the print queue, and again you can pause, delete, restart, and pause printing completely. So it's basically the same idea, but you find it in a different way. So you can go to your printer here, double click it, and it will take you to the print queue. So that's printing. Scanning varies somewhat depending on the printer scanner you have, what software you want to use to scan. But a lot of, for example, the HP printers will actually come with a either a scanner program. So let's see if this one has any scanner programs here. HP, Hewlett Packard, here we go, HP Scan. So this particular printer, which is printing away in the background here, has a specific scan program that comes with it. So you would use that to scan. But also you will sometimes find here in the print and scan system preferences that you'll actually have a print tab and a scan tab here. And the scan tab would maybe take you to this scanner application, or might just open a window here where you can scan directly. So it can be quite specific to the printer and to the software that comes with it. So that's printing and scanning, how to set up printers and use them on the Mac. So we discussed earlier about security on the Mac and how the Mac is particularly stable and secure because it's built on Unix and for various other reasons. Now, one of the most noticeable security features of the Mac is that when you try to do anything that requires some form, or should require some form of authentication, the Mac will enforce that automatically. So, for example, if I go to the Apple menu, System Preferences, and I go to the Users and Groups panel, and I decide, well, I want to delete this user. Well, deleting that user is not something that you'd want to do just because you feel like it, and you might not have permission to delete that user. That could be the owner of the computer, and even though you have an administrator account and would have permission of that level to delete another user, you wouldn't necessarily want somebody just to come along and click on that and say, oh, delete that user. That will delete all their files, all their documents, photos, music, everything they've got, all their preferences. So there's a couple of levels of security that are implemented here. One is that you need to have a particular level of access. So for example, this demo account has administrator access. It could be a standard account, in which case it would not be allowed to delete an administrator account no matter what. However, as this account is an administrator account as well, it would be allowed to delete this administrator account. But you can see that these accounts are actually grayed out at the moment. So I can click on the demo account. I can look at login items for the demo account. Let's take a second to load that up. So you can see here some login items for the demo account, and I can add and actually remove those. Some of those, not a major problem, nothing too security required there. I can change the password for this account. But if I want to do anything else, like for example access these features here where it says allow user to reset password using Apple ID, enable parental controls, and so on, I need access to do that. And the way I get that access is by clicking the lock symbol, and this is called a system authentication. When you click that lock, it will ask you to enter an administrator name and password in order to unlock this panel and the rest of the features available in this panel. So I'm going to put my administrator password, and now you'll see that suddenly there's more features available to me. And I can even, it probably won't allow me to do much with this user because he's actually logged in at the moment. You can see the tick here. But for example, the guest user, you'd be able to delete them. You can switch off guests logging in. On my own demo account here, it now allows me to change these settings. And you can see the padlock is open, which means that I'm actually authenticated and allowed to make changes now on this panel. If I want to lock that again, so that somebody would have to enter my password in order to make changes to this, and just click the lock, it locks it up, and now I can't change anything here unless I enter the password. So somebody can come along here while I'm away from my desk and can try and make these changes, but it will ask for a password for this account. And if they don't know that password, they won't be able to make those changes. Now, this is one example of where this system authentication is used, but it's more common when you're installing a program. So let's do this with TeamViewer, for example. I have downloaded already. We'll open up the TeamViewer DMG. The extension DMG means that it's a disk image. So it opens up a little disk icon on your desktop. Here's a nice installer file. We'll open the installer file, and it says it's going to guide us through the steps. And this is perfect. I'm not actually going to install this, but you will see at the point at which the system authentication comes in. So we click continue, continue. Yes, we agree to the agreement. It says it's going to take 60 megabytes. That's fine. We click install, and bang, system authentication. You cannot install a program on this computer using this demo account unless you know the demo account password. So anytime, I would have to enter the demo account password now, and then it would continue on to install. I'm just going to quit in this case. But anytime changes are made to the system, particularly if files are being installed into folders such as the system folder, library, applications, sort of protected folders on the Mac, or protected procedures that the system knows if someone is trying to do this and it's going to make changes to certain things, they must authenticate to prove that they have the rights to do that. And this is a very powerful security feature built into the Mac. Sometimes people find it a bit frustrating because they're not sure what it is or why they're being asked for this. But what it's actually asking you for is the password for your user account on this Mac, to prove that it's you that's trying to install the software and not somebody else trying to install something that you don't know about, or something that might make changes to your computer that you don't want. So it's a very, very important feature, and you'll see it popping up every now and again. So it's important, even if you have automatic login switched on, so you don't ever have to log in when you switch your computer on, that you know what your username and password is for your Mac, because you will need it in certain situations like this. So in this section we're going to look at some more advanced features and differences between the Mac and Windows. Some regular users might not understand some of these things or might not ever use these things, but they're important to be aware of. So to start with, writing a path to a particular folder or file on Windows, you would generally write, for example, to the path to a folder called temp on your C drive. You would write C:/temp, and that would take you to a folder called temp on your C drive. On the Mac, you can see the folder separator on Windows is the / key. So if we were going to a folder, another folder inside temp called temp2, it would be C:/temp/temp2. On the Mac, it actually uses the colon separator to distinguish folders. So you might say Macintosh HD temp:/temp2. And this is very important because it means that you can't use a colon in the name of a folder or file on the Mac. You must never use a colon. You can use dashes and slashes and whatever you want, but don't use a colon. Now, that's how the Mac internally represents the folders in paths and so on. If you are using, in the Finder, we can go to the Go menu, go to Folder, and we want to go to a specific folder. You do use the / key, but you don't have to put C: or D: or to tell it which disk you're talking about. It's a little bit more English language related. So you can say just /system, and that will go straight to the system folder on the startup drive, whichever disk the computer has actually started up from and has the main operating system on. So when you use the go to folder function, when you use the / here, the / means it's starting at the root, and the root is always the disk on which the operating system resides. So we can say /applications, and we'll see the applications folder. You can go deeper and you can actually access hidden folders here. So you could say /user/bin, which is a Unix hidden folder. It has all the binary executables in there. And you can see here that the user folder is kind of grayed because it's actually a hidden folder. So when you're using paths, they are Unix paths that you use. Sorry, not connect to server, but go to folder. You're using Unix paths in here. And if you want to specify a specific disk, what you would do is /volumes/ and the name of the disk. So in this case, Macintosh HD, and spaces are okay in there. / the folder we want, system, and again it will take us straight to the same folder. So it's important to understand that this is the format on Windows, and this is how the Mac actually represents them in paths, generally in or you can actually do it either way really on the Mac now that it's based on Unix. So the same path as above would be /volumes/ Macintosh HD /temp/temp2, or simply /temp/temp2 if Macintosh HD is your startup volume. So it's important to understand that, because if you start mentioning drive letters and things like that, you won't be able to get to the folder you're looking for. So that's the first thing. We'll just close this down. Won't bother to save it. Okay. Now the next thing is that there are special folders similar to in Windows. We'll just have a look at Windows for a second. If we look on computer in the local C disk, you'll see there's a Windows folder. And inside the Windows folder there are all sorts of things to do with Windows, and there's a System32 folder. And inside the System32 folder you've got drivers and you've got all sorts of other things. So on the Mac you have special folders like that as well. You've got the System folder, which is in the root directory of your hard disk. And inside there's a library folder, which has all the stuff that the system needs to refer to. And then you also have another special folder called library, which has a lot of other reference libraries that the system uses. And generally speaking, system library, you don't really want to go messing around in there too much unless you really know what you're doing. And if you try to delete something from there, it will likely ask you to authenticate, because you shouldn't really be deleting anything in there unless you know what you're doing. And you don't want to delete anything in there by accident. But it won't really allow you to do that. Then the applications folder is another special folder where all the applications are stored. But you can generally delete stuff out of here without authenticating. You can just throw it in the trash if you don't want it. And finally, you have the users folder. And the users folder, again, all of these are in the root directory of your hard disk, of your startup drive. And the users folder contains a user for each user account on the computer. So when you go to system preferences, users and groups, we'll just take a look at that so you can remember what it looks like. Users and groups. You'll see demo. There's the folder for demo. David Griffith. That's the short name that I've chosen for my account. A guest account. And then there's a shared folder, which is only used for allowing access from any of these accounts to this folder. So if you want to transfer files between user accounts, it's quite useful. So effectively, every account that is created in here has a folder in the users folder here. And inside each one of those, you will generally have the same group of folders: desktop, documents, downloads, movies, music, pictures, and public, and others that you might create yourself. So you can see some more extra ones inside my folder, but the standard ones are there: desktop, documents, downloads, and the guest one will have the same thing. And the little no entry symbol on there means that I don't have access to the stuff in there. And equally on here, I don't have access to the stuff in the Dropbox on this one. demo, I have access to everything because this is my account. You can see I'm logged in as demo at the moment. Okay. So this is a special folder which is actually managed by the system as well. You can delete things from there. You can delete the files folder or the guest folder, but it's going to probably ask you to authenticate, and you don't really want to do that. It's better to delete them through the users and groups system preference panel, because it will make sure that everything is done properly and cleaned up and tidied up afterwards. So those are the special folders that you need to be aware of: users, system, library, and applications. So on the Mac, to access network resources, you have a number of options. You have the Go menu here in the Finder, where you can say connect to server, and you can effectively connect to any type of server: FTP, AFP, SMB, various different types of servers. On Windows, what you would be used to would be perhaps typing in here / and my network resource, whatever it might be called. Could be an IP address, could be an FTP server, could be a local server. So you would type it in there, and if it was something that needed logon details, it would generally pop up and ask you for logon details, and then connect. Or you can go to your network section here, find what you want to connect to, click on it, and it will load up whatever is available to you there. It might be a server or printers or whatever. You would be able to see them in this window. On the Mac, you have a similar thing. Open your Macintosh HD or open any Finder window, and under the shared section, which can be hidden, by the way. So if you don't see anything there, if you move over it and click the show box, show link here, it will show everything. This shows you the network items that it's able to see. So there's actually the same device that we saw over in Windows. And if you click on it, it will try and connect automatically as a guest. You can click connect as, and it will attempt to connect, and it will ask you for a username and password. Or if you know the IP address or the network resource name of the resource you're trying to connect to, maybe it's something that wouldn't appear here, but you know the IP address, you can go connect to server. And maybe it's an Apple, let's say it's somebody else's computer that you're trying to connect to, which doesn't show itself here in the shared section. You could say AFP, which is for Apple share type servers, / and the IP address that you're trying to connect to, whatever it is. Or it might be an FTP server, so you could FTP. You could put the username, so user and password at ftp dot whatever domain it might be, and press connect. And that will go off and try and connect. That's giving me an error trying to connect to this one that it was connecting to earlier. Okay, this is now trying to connect to footis.com using the user name user and the password that I gave it, but of course they're not valid. So it's asking me to enter a password, or user and password if I know them, or connect as a guest if it will allow that. So we'll try and connect as a guest. Okay, and it has probably not connected us as a guest because I don't think it will allow that. But this is how you would connect to a server. So let's say, for example, I try that with no username and password there at all. I'll just try and connect as a guest again. See will it allow it. Here we go. Okay, so now I actually have here listed under shared the FTP server that I've connected to. I can click it and I can see it directly here, and I can see the contents, or this is actually in a separate window showing the same thing. And I can go in there and have a look at those. I can copy files in and out if I'm permitted, and this is actually direct access to an FTP server from my desktop here, which is really nice. It's a very quick way of connecting. And this little symbol beside it is when you want to disconnect. So when you're finished, you can click disconnect, you can click this symbol, you can click this symbol. They all are related to the same thing. We're going to disconnect Windows FTP server, click and disconnect it. Okay, so there are various and similar ways of connecting to network resources on the Mac, but you can see there where you find them. Go connect to server if you know the details and it's a little bit more advanced doing it that way, or connecting to network resources which you can actually see, that the Mac can see on your local network. Click it and connect. Now, we've looked briefly at network interfaces earlier when we were looking at the System Preferences tab and Wi-Fi. So we're going to take a look at that in a little bit more detail now. So we go to Apple menu, System Preferences, Network. On Windows, the equivalent is Start, Control Panel, Network and Internet, and then you're into the settings to do with your network. So you might want to have a look at Network and Sharing Center, and in here Windows represents this in a particular way. You can go and change adapter settings, and in here you're seeing your actual network adapters. This is more or less what we're looking at here. Bluetooth on the Mac is actually handled slightly differently. It has its own tab here in the System Preferences. Go back to Network. But you can actually add Bluetooth as a network interface as opposed to Bluetooth for just connecting things like keyboards and mice and so on. If we flick back to Windows for a second, you'll see that Bluetooth network connection is actually showing up here under network connections automatically, and you've got local area connection, which is actually your Ethernet adapter. So here is your Ethernet adapter, here is your Wi-Fi card, airport, as we discussed before, and there are other things that you can add if you want to. Firewire, Bluetooth, you can set up VPNs and various different things here, but the default things that are added and detected are these. So you can configure these individually. You select the one you want to configure, and you can see that on the Ethernet adapter, the physical cable that's plugged into my Mac, I have the IP address configured manually. If you don't know what this means, it probably doesn't matter to you, but if you do know what it means, it's very useful to know where this information is and how you change it. So the cable connection, the Ethernet adapter, is configured manually here. To change any of those settings, Advanced, configure using DHCP, manually, change the DNS, WINS, all the different settings that you might need. Proxies, if you want to use a web proxy or FTP proxy, this is where you set it up. It's all in here in the tabs, which are found in the Advanced tab of the Ethernet adapter. Likewise for Wi-Fi, you can switch on and off the card. So if you don't want Wi-Fi on, which I actually don't in this case, so I'll be switching it off in a minute, it shows you the network that you're connected to, whether you want to show the icon in the menu bar, and again into Advanced, shows you all the other settings that you might want. And these are all specific to the Wi-Fi card, to that particular adapter. You can change TCP/IP settings, DNS, and so on. The same as with the Ethernet adapter, but there are some different settings for Wi-Fi. The one very useful thing to know, this is a feature that the Mac has, which you might well have a need for, and a lot of people don't know this even exists. As far as I'm aware, it doesn't exist on Windows, and it's well, it probably does, but in a more limited way. So you can have different settings for different locations. So for example, some people, when they're at work, might have to have their Ethernet card or their Wi-Fi card set on a manual IP address in order for their computer to work properly with the network configuration in work. But when they get home, that configuration may actually stop them from being able to connect to the internet. So they'll have to change the settings maybe back to DHCP when they get home. And this can be a bit of a nightmare if you're obviously going to work every day, going home every day, and trying to use the computer in various locations. This particularly applies to laptops, obviously. So what location allows you to do is to say, right, I'm going to have one location called, in this case there's one called automatic. We'll just make a new one called work. Now it's changed the location to work, and we can set these settings any way we like. So we'll say, yes, our Ethernet card, we're going to use DHCP when we're in work. And our Wi-Fi card, we're going to also use DHCP. Okay, that's already on DHCP. That's fine. So we'll leave that as it is. And we'll say that automatic is going to be home, basically. When we get home, we put everything on automatic. So we switch to automatic and hit apply. And what that does is it changes all the network settings for each of the different adapters we have to match the settings that we want when we choose automatic or home. So you can see Ethernet is configured manually, Wi-Fi is configured using DHCP. Okay, now we go to work. As soon as we get to work, we change the settings to work. Now if we look at it, Wi-Fi is still configured using DHCP. Sorry, I haven't applied that. When you change that in system preferences, when you change this location, you need to hit apply. And Ethernet is now configured using DHCP. So basically, these are two different sets of settings for each of your network adapters that you can just choose one location. So we'll choose automatic, and it changes, you hit apply, and it changes all the settings for you. Now, you can do this inside the system preferences panel, but the beauty of this feature is that you set these up the way you want them, and then you close down your system preferences panel, and when you get to work, you go to the Apple menu, you choose location, work. Give it 3-4 seconds, everything changes, Wi-Fi is on and connected, you're now in work with all the settings, with all the network settings as you need them in work, DHCP. Okay. Then you come home, you don't have to go near system preferences, you just go location, automatic in this case, we said that was our home settings. Give it a few seconds, it changes all the settings for you. If you go back into system preferences and check, you'll see that this is now configured manually. So there are two different sets of settings, or as many sets as you want. You can have as many sets of different settings as you want. But most people would use probably 2 or 3. I, working as an IT engineer, would have probably had 4 or 5 different sets for different configurations of IP addresses and so on, depending on the location that I was going to be in, or very common ones that I would use. Most people would probably have 2 or maybe 3. But it's a very quick way to change your network settings from one set of pre-configured settings that you know you need in one place to another set of pre-configured settings that you need in another place. So next I'd like to talk to you quickly about using multiple displays with your Mac, because practically every Mac has the capacity to have at least 2 monitors connected. Even laptops, you can connect 1 and sometimes even more monitors to it, and use the internal laptop monitor as well. In my case, I'm using a Mac Mini, and I have 2 23-inch displays connected. So I want to show you how you would see how you would configure the 2 screens to work together. And it's very easy. You go into your system preferences again. So you see you use system preferences a lot. And you have a panel called displays. And in the system preference displays panel, what you're seeing here is the settings for the display that we're currently looking at, this display. Now I have a second display over here off to the right connected, and you can't see that at the moment. But if we click arrangement, you'll see that it actually shows you the 2 screens that you've got and where they are in relation to each other. And this is very important, because if I have you need to set this up to match your physical configuration. So I have another screen to the right of this main screen that we're looking at the moment. If my main screen was on the right and this screen was on the left, I would need to switch these around. And what happens there is that when I put this in a particular position, if you watch the mouse, as I move to the right here, it disappears off the screen. Now I'm actually on the other screen. And as I move back, it suddenly appears back on. Now if I go to the other side, it's a wall. It won't go out there. But it will go out this side because it's moving onto the extended desktop on my other screen. Now if I switch these around, and I put that screen on the other side, now it will be expecting me to have a screen physically located on this side. So it will allow me to go out there. But when I go out there, what happens is it actually comes, the arrow actually appears on the second monitor, which is physically located to my right. So it doesn't make any logical sense. So when I move out of the screen here, it's appearing on a screen that's to my right instead of to my left, which is why you use the arrangement and you say, no, actually that screen is not there. That screen is here. Okay, it readjusts itself, and now when I move out of here, it just moves straight onto the other screen, which is fantastic. It also allows you to adjust for the possibility of having a smaller screen or smaller display resolution on another screen. So if this box was half the size because I was using a much smaller screen as my secondary screen, or a different resolution, because actually on this other screen I'm also seeing a panel like this where I can change the resolution of that screen. So you can change them independently. So if I was using a smaller resolution or smaller screen on the other physical monitor I have, this would be a smaller box. So therefore these don't have to be directly side by side like they are here. I could move this like this, which means that when I get to here, it's a wall. I can't go out there. But when I move down here, I can. So you can see you're setting up the physical boundaries as to where the boundaries are between the two screens when you're moving from one to the other. So it's basically to make the computer's awareness of your screens match the physical location of your screens on the desk. And you also have in the displays panel, you have AirPlay mirroring on the newer Macs. And what this allows you to do is actually mirror your display exactly as you see it via an Apple TV onto a standard TV screen with HDMI. And this can be fantastic. If you can effectively use your Mac as a projector using an Apple TV device connected to a TV. So that's where you would use AirPlay mirroring. So next we're going to look at another advanced concept, which is setting the startup disk, telling your Mac which disk it should start up from. On Windows, you generally have to do this from the BIOS. So you would have to hit a key when the Mac is starting up, which will take you into the BIOS, and you have to actually tell it which disk should be the primary disk to start up from. And it's not a very simple process. Whereas on the Mac, you simply go to the Apple menu, System Preferences, and it won't allow you to choose a disk to start up from that doesn't have a valid operating system on it. So you choose the Startup Disk panel from System Preferences, and it will show you here all the disks that actually have valid operating systems on them. So if you inserted an external disk connected to a USB drive or something that had a valid operating system on it, or a CD, DVD, pen drive, whatever it may be, you can choose, it will tell you here which version of the operating system is detected on there. You click the disk you want and you hit restart. And that will actually restart the computer using that disk. Now the Mac's clever enough that if you for example, if you used a USB external disk and then you told it to restart and then you disconnected the USB disk, it will automatically use the internal hard drive, as it knows that there's an operating system working on there and that you would surely want to boot up into that if it can't boot up with anything else. So that makes perfect sense. Again, it's a part of the intuitive interface. You also have this other option here, which is to restart this computer in target disk mode. And what that means is that you can actually connect your Mac to another Mac using a Thunderbolt or a FireWire cable. and your Mac will actually boot in a special mode that the other Mac will see it as an external hard disk, and you can literally mount your hard disk and you can copy files across and just use it as an external hard disk. So that's what target disk mode is. However, this is if you have a working operating system. You're able to boot up, go to System Preferences, and tell the Mac which disk you want to start up from. But what happens if you don't have a working operating system? So something's happened to your internal hard disk and you need to boot from another disk, but you don't have any way of getting in here to tell it which one to use. Now, I'm not going to be able to demonstrate this because I can't record it, so I'm going to explain to you what you would do. It's very simple. To get a similar interface to this, as you're starting up your Mac, you simply power the Mac on and you hold down the Option key on your keyboard. And by holding down the Option key, it will automatically boot into a built-in interface like this practically immediately after starting up, after you hear the chime. And it will show you all of the available volumes that it can see that it can start up from. So if you were to insert a DVD or connect a bootable pen drive or an external hard disk, even if your internal disk is damaged and isn't showing up, any disk that's connected that has a working operating system on it will show up. You can literally use the arrow keys on your keyboard to choose the one that you want, hit return, and it will boot from that disk. So this is a really useful thing to know if you are trying to troubleshoot, you run into problems. That's how you can determine even if your Mac is able to see your internal hard disk. You'll often find that if something goes wrong when you switch your Mac on, and if the disk is damaged or something, you'll see a little flashing question mark in the middle of the screen. And that indicates a problem with your hard disk. So if you switch the Mac off, switch it back on again holding down the Option key, and maybe with a DVD inserted, you'll see the DVD, you can click it, tell it to start up, and at least you can boot from that and get into the recovery or installation console. Now, another thing that we discussed briefly in an earlier section was the force quit command. So let's open Notes, and we'll open just one or two other apps so you can see this a little more clearly. We'll bring Notes to the front, and say we're working in Notes and suddenly we get the little spinning beach ball and something's gone wrong and Notes is kind of locked up for some reason. What you can do is you can go to the Apple menu and you choose Force Quit. Now the keyboard shortcut for this is Command, Option, Escape. So it's like Control Alt Delete. Command, Option, Escape. You press those keys or you choose this option and it brings up this menu here. And this menu shows you all the applications that are currently open, and if one is not responding and giving you this spinning beach ball, you'll see beside it here, it'll be in red and it'll say not responding. So you simply click the one that's not responding, force quit. It says, are you sure you want to force quit because anything you haven't saved up to now is going to be lost? Yes, I want to force quit it because it's not working and it's gone. And what that does is it shuts down that process. It doesn't affect any of the other processes running on your Mac, any of the other apps. It doesn't make it unstable. And you can simply reopen the program. And you'll see it's appeared here again. And it should now work normally. And it's not that often that this happens, but sometimes for one reason or another, an application will just freeze, or not even freeze, but you just get this spinning beach ball where it's just not responsive. Sometimes if you leave it for a while, it will come back. And sometimes you leave it and it doesn't come back, and you have to just force quit it to close it down and reopen it. So it's very important to be aware of this. But this is similar, force quit is similar to the task manager. Or in actual fact, what it is the same as on Windows, I'll just close this down. If we do Control Alt Delete, we can get to Task Manager. And the Task Manager on Windows allows you to end tasks. Now we don't really have any applications open here, we'll just open one so that you can see. Say sticky notes. Okay, so it's basically the same as this. So end task is the same as force quit. The Task Manager that you're looking at here effectively does exist on the Mac as well, but it's a separate application. So we're going to go back and have a look at that now. So if you were to go to your Macintosh HD, into your applications, there's a folder here called Utilities. and it has lots of useful utilities in here, most of which we're not going to cover now, but they are things that you'll need from time to time. Disk utility, for example, is a really good one. But what we're going to look at here is the activity monitor. And the activity monitor is effectively the same as what we were just looking at on Windows. It shows you all the processes. You can actually quit a process directly from here, but the force quit command here gives you a more user-friendly view of what's going on. So it shows you the actual applications that are open. This shows you all the processes. So if you know what they are, you can force quit them from here. You can also see memory usage, disk activity, disk usage, network usage. You can view various different things like system processes and active processes, inactive processes. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do in there. Most people don't ever go in there unless they just want to look at the CPU usage. So if your CPU usage is like really high for some reason, and you might see here that one of these processes is using an abnormal amount of processor time, you may want to force quit it. But this will help you to identify which process might be causing the problem. That's where most people would use this activity monitor. It's just very good to know that it's there and that you can access it, and it's the same type of thing as accessing the task manager on Windows. Now we're just going to talk a little bit about sharing on the Mac, file sharing, printer sharing, even internet sharing. And all of this happens, again, Apple Menu System Preferences and in the Sharing panel. And in here you have options for sharing various different types of things. The main things that people would be concerned with would be file sharing, maybe screen sharing, printer sharing, and possibly internet sharing. So this is your control center for configuring all your sharing settings. Generally, file sharing will be switched on by default. You can switch that off so the file sharing is not available at all from your Mac. But if you have file sharing switched on, you can effectively set your Mac up to be like a little server, and you can define the folders that you want to share, who is allowed to access those folders, which user accounts can get in there, can everybody get in there, what can they do, can they just see what's in there, can they read and write, can they only drop stuff in there like a Dropbox. So you can configure each individual folder as you want, and there are some other options you can configure here. You can enable sharing files with Windows using SMB. So you can say, right, David Griffith is allowed to connect to this Mac using the Windows networking protocol, SMB, Samba, and connect to my Mac and copy files over and back, or read files, write files, and so on, as you wish. The permissions that you set here will apply to the user accounts that you allow to access via Windows. So if you're trying to set up a little network at home where you've got your new Mac and your old Windows machine, and you want to maybe connect from your Windows machine to your Mac and copy some files, this is where you're going to go. You're going to go to file sharing. You're going to make sure it's switched on. You're going to make sure that you have a folder on your Mac shared. It can be your user folder, it can be your documents folder, whatever you like. You just hit the plus and you choose the folder you want to share. So let's say if we share the documents folder here, say add. Okay, this folder is now shared, and we're going to say that this user only has read-write access. So my user called demo, and we're going to say we want to allow Windows computers to connect to this Mac on demo account, and you must know the password for that account. So we enter the password for that account, and it enables the sharing. Now you will be able to go to Windows and, for example, open a window like so. I know the IP address of my Mac. I put in my username and my password, and now I can see documents that are shared. So it's quite straightforward actually to allow Windows computers to connect to your Mac. And this might be useful if you have files that you want to copy over to your new Mac, or you want to just set up a little sharing environment between for example, a Windows computer that you're still using and your new Mac, so they can share files between them. You can also set up printer sharing. So you can share, at the moment this is switched off, you must switch this on, and then you can decide which printers you want to share, who is allowed to access them, what they can do. You can restrict people certain accounts that they can't print, and then you can go directly to the print and scan preferences if you wish. Switch on sharing for this printer in here. It effectively does the same thing as switching it on in here. So this is where you would set your printer sharing. One other feature, and this is quite an advanced feature that most people probably don't even know exists or wouldn't know how to configure, but it's very useful if, for example, your Mac has a 3G dongle, 3G modem to connect to the internet, and you want to share that connection via Wi-Fi with another device in the house that doesn't have internet access. So you can effectively create your own Wi-Fi network and share the internet connection from the dongle. So what you would do is you click on internet sharing. I could, for example, in this case, I have both a cabled connection and a Wi-Fi connection in my Mac. So I could say I want to switch on internet sharing. I want to share the connection from my Ethernet physical cable connection onto the Wi-Fi port. And that will actually create a wireless network, and you'll have Wi-Fi options here if you enable that. You can decide what the name of the network is that you want to make, what channel you want it to be on, if you want it to have any security. And it will act as a little router. So other devices in the house can connect to David's Mac Mini Wi-Fi using the password that you set in there. And as long as you've got internet sharing switched on, they will be able to connect to the internet through your Mac and through the internet connection that you have. So it's a fantastic feature that you could need in certain situations. I've used this many times to give iPads, for example, that don't have the facility to put a SIM card inside, to give them Wi-Fi access via my laptop or even via my iPhone, but particularly via the laptop or a Mac. They can have Wi-Fi access to the internet via an internet connection that the Mac has. So very useful. And there are other options in here such as screen sharing, which allows another person using a Mac or in fact any VNC client to take over or to view your screen and potentially even control your screen remotely from their computer. So this is something that I would use quite a lot, so I generally leave that switched on, but you can switch it off if you want to make sure that no one can ever do that. So there's a lot of sharing features in here that will be very useful, and this is where you find them. System preferences, sharing. So in this final section we're going to take a look at some of the really cool features of OS X, just so that you're aware of them. We're not going to go into too much detail, we're just going to demonstrate them. So the first thing we're going to look at is Command Tab. This is a fast way to switch between applications, between open applications. So I'm going to open Contacts, Calendar, Reminders, Notes. So you've got quite a few different things open here. Often when you have multiple applications open, you may have multiple windows in each application and different things are getting cluttered on the screen. You want to switch quickly from one application to another. Well, you can click its window if you can see it, so that'll bring the address book to the front. If you can't, there's a very quick way to switch between them. That's to hold down the Command key and the Tab key. Press the Tab key. By pressing the Tab key, this menu appears, and this menu will remain visible while you're holding down the Command key, and every time you press the Tab key it moves to the next application in the list. These are all applications that are currently open. If you hold Shift as well and press the Tab key, it will go back the other way. So if you happen to have loads of applications and you want to skip forward or backwards through this, you just use the Shift key. So pressing Command Tab, you let go the buttons on whichever one you want and it brings it to the front. Fantastic time-saving feature. I use it all the time. I'll just close these apps down so I can show you the next thing, which is the App Store. The App Store is a fantastic addition to macOS X. It's this icon here in the dock. You'll also find it in your applications folder. And clicking the App Store icon will open the App Store. It's now loading the featured apps. So effectively this is a place where you can, it's a marketplace where people that have made apps for the Mac list them as available on Apple's App Store. You can go in here and search for whatever you want. Let's say we want something like word processing or something like that. Okay, we've got Quick Word here, we've got Pages, and loads of other related word related apps. So if we click on Pages, it will load up the Pages. Description tells you what it is, what version it is, what operating system it works on, lots more information about it, some screenshots, so you can see different parts of it, ratings from other users and so on. I want it, click here, buy app. Will ask you to log in with your Apple ID, which you'll have set up when you purchased your Mac or when you set up your Mac originally. It will then download that app directly to your computer, and it will appear here in Launchpad, which we'll look at in a minute, and you can add it to your dock. It'll be in your applications folder, and off you go. The App Store also handles updates, so you can see apps that you've purchased. You obviously have to sign in to see that. You can see updates that are available for any apps that you've downloaded and purchased. They'll appear here. Also, system updates appear here, as we discussed earlier. And you simply click to update whichever apps have available updates. So it's all integrated and all handled for you, which is a fantastic facility. You no longer have to go to a store to buy a physical packaged piece of software. You can just download it directly and off you go. Use it immediately. Next, we're going to have a quick look at Spotlight, which we mentioned before, which is this little magnifying glass here in the top right corner. Clicking Spotlight, basically this is a system-wide search. So let's say we want to search for document. This will show us all the things related to this. We've got Microsoft Document Connection, which is an application. Another application called Analyze Documents. We've got documents here with the word document in the name. It will actually also search inside the documents to see if the word document appears. It will search in emails, PDF documents, music, you name it. And you can even do web searches for the word document if you wish. So this is a comprehensive search feature that searches everything on your Mac, inside files, inside documents, inside mail messages. It's really quite astounding. Another useful way of using this is to activate Spotlight. You can either click that little magnifying glass, or you can do Command Space. That will activate it straight away, and you can start typing, for example, the name of an application, Safari. There we go, there's Safari, hit return, boom, Safari opens. So Command Space, Skype, very quick way of finding and opening applications. In actual fact, a lot of people don't even use the dock anymore. They don't use the applications folder, they just use Spotlight to open their apps. So very, very useful. Next we'll look at the Launchpad and Mission Control. Launchpad basically has all the applications that are installed listed, so you can get a quick access to them. So if you're not sure, well, you'll know they're in the applications folder, but if you want to find them, you can arrange this the way you like it. You can put the icons in different places. You can have different panes or different screens of icons, which is quite like how the iPhone and iPad works. Then you have Mission Control. And Mission Control basically handles multiple desktops. So you can see here I've got desktop 1, desktop 2. This is how I'm switching from the Mac to Windows. So we can click on desktop 2 here. Windows is just gone to sleep. Wait for it to wake up. Here's Windows. Okay. And if we go back to Mission Control, you can see that I'm now looking at desktop 2. So effectively, if I only have one screen, this allows me to have two desktops as if I had two screens, but to switch between them on one screen. So if I go back to desktop 1, there's a shortcut. You can actually configure the shortcut to be whatever you want. Mine is configured to be control and right arrow or control and left arrow to switch from one desktop to the other. So I'm on the Mac desktop, control right arrow, Windows desktop, control left arrow, back to the Mac desktop. And in fact, if I go left again, it takes me to the dashboard where all my little widgets are, calculator, weather. There's lots of extra widgets here that you can add in, unit converters and flight trackers, and you can download huge numbers of widgets. Very useful little utilities that you can have here on a quick access screen. So control right and I'm back to my first desktop. Again, I'm onto my Windows desktop, back again to my Mac desktop. So this is a tool that I use all the time. I find it absolutely fantastic. I actually have 3 desktops and 2 monitors, so effectively I have 6 desktops. But it actually does come in very handy once you get used to using it and understand how it works. Next we have the feature called fast user switching, and you can enable this feature if it's not enabled in the Apple menu, System Preferences, Users and Groups, and you'll see login options. These options are only available once you've authenticated. So we click the lock like we did before, authenticate. Oh, wrong password. Now it activates all these features. These are extra features that you can configure for your user account. Or in actual fact, these options apply to all user accounts. At the moment, it's set to automatically log me in as David Griffith. There's some options for on the login screen how it displays, but what we're interested in here is show fast user switching menu. I've enabled that and it's showing the full name. So it's showing me here the full name of the account that's currently logged in. If I want to switch to another account, I choose the name from the list, ask me for the password, and it will literally rotate and put me into that account. And then I can switch back again. I'm not going to do it because you can't really record that effect, so I'll just leave that. You can test it out yourself. But this is really, really useful to switch between different accounts. There are a few things you need to be aware of. Obviously, you can see that this account is also logged in. At the moment, it has a little tick beside it. What that means is that that account is also using resources. So it's using memory, it's using processor time and so on. It's not really using much in the background as such, but it has resources in use. And also, if I try to shut the computer down now, it's going to tell me that there are other users logged in, and do I want to override that and basically force them to shut down, in which case they could lose things that they were working on before I switched over to my account. So just little things to be aware of. Another lovely feature of the Mac is that it has zip compression built in. So let's have a look in documents here. Let's say we've got this folder here and we want to compress it. Right click, compress my folder, makes you a zip file built into the operating system. But even nicer still, and this is such a huge feature that the Mac has, the Windows doesn't have and should have. It has PDF creation built in. So if you take this page here, which is changing whenever it feels like it, if you take this page and you want to print it, you would go File, Print, and you'd send it to your printer. However, if you just want to save it as a PDF, it's actually not a very good example. Just choose a different page, one that's a bit more static. Print. Instead of printing it, we say save as PDF or open PDF in preview, but we'll just save as a PDF. We'll save it as Apple support.pdf and we'll save it on the desktop. We'll close down Safari and lo and behold, here's our PDF. We'll double click it, it opens in preview, and there's our PDF document. As simple as that to make a PDF. And making PDFs is something that a lot of people need to do these days. You don't want to have to go and buy or download a piece of software to convert your documents into PDFs and so on. The Mac does it for you. The same as if it would print it, it would make a PDF. Beautiful. Into the trash. Bye-bye. The Mac also, as we discussed earlier, comes with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth as standard. So we have our Wi-Fi airport menu here, Wi-Fi card built in on all Macs. Practically all. In fact, I think the Mac Pros now do come with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in as standard. In the past, sometimes you had to buy a card. Bluetooth here, built in for mice, keyboards. You can even use it for networking. But you can switch it on and off, but it is there already. You don't have to buy an extra card. You don't have to buy a USB device. It's already built in. There are two more amazing features. One is iCloud. And the iCloud is a built-in system which allows you to synchronize your contacts, calendars, email accounts, not your email, but the actual email account setup, notes, Safari bookmarks, all sorts of different things, through Apple's cloud service to your other devices such as iPhones, iPads, other Mac devices. And this is, as well as doing that, it also allows you use the same Apple ID to buy your apps and music, and you can actually even store some of your music in the cloud if you want to do that. It stores your music purchases and various other things. So you generally set iCloud up when you initially set up your Mac, but in system preferences you'll find iCloud. This one is not logged in, but when it's logged in with your Apple ID, it gives you the option of all the different things that you want to synchronize. And as long as you're using the same Apple ID on your iPhone or your iPad, it will synchronize the contacts, calendars, and everything between them all. So if I'm out on the road and I've got my iPhone with me and somebody calls me and makes an appointment, I pop it into my calendar. When I get back to my Mac in the office, it's already in the calendar. Everything is synchronized and up to date. And it really does make life so easy. And it also means that if anything happens to your Mac or your iPhone or your iPad, you just buy a new device. You physically buy new hardware if yours is broken or stolen or whatever. You log in with your Apple ID and password, and it just downloads everything from the cloud and puts you back where you were. And that is absolutely, for me, I couldn't live without that kind of service anymore. And the last thing we're going to look at, and this is something that everybody should be using, everybody should be aware of, and it is, for me, one of the key reasons to even consider using Mac OS X, because it has a backup system built in, and I'm always telling people to back up. I ask them, have they backed up? Oh no, I'm going to do it tomorrow, and they never do it. Maybe they forget to buy the drive, but it's more so they don't know how to back up, they don't know how to do it, they don't know what they should be backing up. A lot of people, standard users, don't even know where they've saved their files. They save them and then they can't find them. So what chance do they have of backing them up? Well, first of all, remember, key piece of information, a backup is only a backup if you have another copy. So taking stuff from your hard disk and copying it to an external drive and then deleting it from your hard disk is not a backup. If your external hard disk dies, it's gone. You can't get the stuff back. The idea is you keep it on your hard disk and you make a copy to an external hard disk so that if something happens to one of them, you have a copy on the other one. That's what a backup is. But Time Machine, again, system preferences, Time Machine, it functions as two things. Firstly, it functions as a backup drive which backs up your entire computer, not just your files, it backs up everything. System folder, applications, settings, preferences, desktop patterns, your documents, your email, everything gets backed up. Everything, automatically. All you've got to do is plug in an external USB hard drive. The Mac will immediately go, oh, you've plugged in an external USB hard drive. Do you want to use this as your Time Machine backup? If you say yes, it starts to back up, it backs everything up, and you don't have to worry about it. If you leave that disconnected, leave the USB, the external disk connected all the time, it will back up every 10 or 15 minutes automatically. You can do it hourly, daily, weekly, backs up all the time. So if something happens to your Mac, your hard disk dies, maybe somebody even takes your Mac or it just breaks, something disastrous happens to it, all of your stuff is on your external disk or your time capsule or whatever type of backup drive you were using. You get a new Mac, you plug it in, it says, oh, do you want to start this as a brand new Mac or do you want to import your data from a Time Machine backup? You tell it to import your data from a Time Machine backup and it puts you back exactly where you were the last time you backed up. And that's just phenomenal. But not only that, It also allows you to use it as its name suggests, as a time machine. So as it's been backing up, so for the sake of argument, say you've got 3 months of backups on there, and it's been backing up every hour, and 2 months ago you deleted some files from your desktop, thinking, nah, I'm never going to need them, just delete them, empty the wastebasket, gone. And in 2 months' time you think, oh, I need those files, but I deleted them. You just simply click on Time Machine. You can have an icon down in here in your dock if you wish. If it's set up, it's normally visible down here, or it will be visible up here in the menu bar. And you say Enter Time Machine. And okay, we can't do it now because I don't have a backup volume set up on this particular account. But effectively, whatever you're looking at, if it's mail, if it's contacts, if it's just a Finder window like so, if it's your desktop, it will launch into Time Machine and it will show you what's on your desktop at the moment. And you simply scroll back in time to the date where you knew that the files were on your desktop, and sure enough, you'll see them on your desktop. You right click on the folder and say, restore this for me please. And it will put it back on your desktop exactly as it was the day you deleted it. And that is absolutely astounding. When you see it working, you'll be blown away. So those are the things that I wanted to quickly showcase. These are just built-in features that come with every Mac. They're built into Mac OS 10.8, and most of the features are even in earlier versions. And I can't recommend them highly enough. So if you haven't bought a Mac, or if you've just bought one and you're getting to use it, just use it and love it. Or go out and buy one if you haven't, because they really are fantastic. So that basically brings us to the end of our course, and I hope you've learned a lot and are now more familiar with how the Mac works and how it compares with Windows. And you can see that actually they're very similar. There's not that much different, but the Mac does have a lot extra to offer. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the course.